Hi everyone, and welcome to the live feed. Brilliant to see you all. I wish I could see you all, but anyway, here I am. Whatever time zone you're in, whatever part of the world you're in, welcome to the live stream. Lots of chat about Formula One, past, present and future. All of it's important. Kind of the present without the past, and we can't really predict what's going to happen in the future without knowing what's going on right now, kind of. Anyway, thanks very much again for tuning in, if that's the right word, for watching. Thanks for your support of this channel, and let's have some fun. So today sadly is the anniversary, if that's the right word, commemorating the departure of Pedro Rodriguez. We lost him on this day in 1971. Wonderful driver, one of my heroes as a kid, just fabulous. And when he was winning those races in the Gulf Porsche 917, particularly in the wet at Brands Hatch, he just became one of my all-time idols. And yeah, very sad. We lost him in that inter-series race at Norris Ring, this time in 71, middle of the year. It was a weekend off, and everyone was wondering, you know, what he was doing driving this sort of privately entered Ferrari in this race. And another car stopped, he swerved to avoid it, hit a wall, the whole thing exploded, and that was it. We lost Pedro Rodriguez. Very sad. Here's a picture I took of Pedro. I remember him really from that day, really. Warwick Farm, 1968. There he is in the BRMP 261, the 2-litre car. He also drove the V12 there. He drove the V12 and the V8, the smaller, lovely V8 that you see there, throughout most of the Tasman series, alternating between the two. That was a much better car for Warwick Farm. It's an interesting picture, isn't it? Because you can see there he's wearing Goodyear overalls, and you can see where the Goodyear logo was on the car at Warwick Farm, but it looks like they've taken it off. Well, for a start, they weren't allowed to carry sponsorship, so that's one of the reasons it came off. But more significantly, a couple of weeks later, this is Pedro. This is a very underrated drive by Pedro. He finished second in the Longford round of the Tasman series. Piers Courage won it famously in the Formula 2 McLaren. Absolutely horrendous conditions. All the storm drains blocked up, and water just flowed over the track, and the drivers just didn't know what to do, whether to go or not. And in the end, they shortened the race and went out. And Piers was on very narrow Dunlops, and his Formula 2 car, Formula 2 McLaren, enabled him to win the race. But anyway, to cut a long story sideways, Piers won that race on Dunlops, and Pedro and Richard Atwood in the other BRM, who drove the V12, were on Dunlops at that point. And I have to say, I can't remember whether Pedro was on Dunlops or Goodyears at Warwick Farm. I suspect he was on Dunlops, and that was really the first time, I think that was the first time they'd ever cut the grooves out of the tyre to help with drainage in the centre groove of the Dunlop tyre, the R7. And that then set the scene for some unbelievable wet weather performances in the 68 Formula One season, notably Jackie Stewart, of course, winning at Zandvoort and at the Nürburgring. But that was the first time those tyres, and they weren't on Piers's car because they were Formula 2 tyres, but on Pedro's car, and he finished second in that race in the wet. And nobody really took any notice of it because Piers Courage had won the race, and fabulous to see Piers win that. What a guy he was too, what a driver too. But there's Pedro in the wet in 68, showing his talent in the wet. And a lot of people, I think, forgotten about that. But anyway, there you go. That's Piers Courage and Pedro Rodriguez. Great memories of Pedro, and yeah, sad memories of him losing his life on this day in 71. What else before we start? I was intrigued by by this gentleman making an appearance at Silverstone, Marcus Vandt. I'm a bit of a fan of his, I got to say. He's one of the European Space Agency astronauts that went up into space earlier this year onto the space station. And I hadn't realized, but apparently he took up an FIA flag in celebration of the 120th anniversary of the FIA up to the space station. What a cool thing. Reminds me a little bit of Dave Scott, who was the commander of Apollo 15 and the first guy to drive the moon rover on the surface of the moon. And he used to come to Formula One races quite a lot after the Apollo program had closed down. And he was the guy that took up a whole lot of first day covers. I don't know how many people know what a first day cover is, probably not the younger viewer, but when new stamps come out, stamps are things you use on envelopes when you put them in a letterbox and post a letter. A lot of people probably don't know about that process today. But anyway, when a new stamp came out, it was called a first day cover. And if you got a first day cover and it was properly stamped by the post office, it had a bit of value, and possibly it went up in value if it was a limited edition stamp. Anyway, Dave Scott took up a whole bunch of first day covers to the surface of the moon and stamped them on the moon. And I think he got fired by NASA for doing that. They put it under the heading of, "This is far too commercial for us." He then went on to, he made a fortune, I think, setting up an agency which basically knocked stray satellites back into orbit and saved insurance companies billions of dollars. So I hope Dave Scott did really well at it. What a great guy he was. Anyway, getting back to Marcus Vandt, that was his Falcon 9, the SpaceX Falcon 9. He went up in January. This is the guy that was at Silverstone with the FIA. He's got the FIA flag in that Falcon 9 there. So I thought that was all pretty cool. He was at Silverstone doing quite a lot of stuff, and I think he was presenting the Pirelli award at one stage and things like that. So it's good to see things like that happening. My only regret is that there was no mention made of the relationship between SpaceX and Dan Gurney. You'd imagine that the FIA would be on top of that, wouldn't you? I mean, we all know now, I think we know, it's not public, hasn't been made public in terms of press releases, but everybody in racing knows that All American Racers, Dan's company, now run by his family, make the landing gear or components for the landing gear on that Falcon 9. And what an amazing link that is between NASA, well, not NASA, between aeronautical space and Formula One, to have that technology from what we knew and loved as the Eagle, of course, when it was a racing car, but to have that technology now applied to things like the Falcon 9, it's just amazing. And you would think that if they're going to do something with astronauts and relate Formula One to the future and all the things that are going on for the benefit of mankind, then you would imagine that they would talk about that link as well, wouldn't you? I couldn't understand why they wouldn't do that. Seemed to be very odd, very remiss anyway. But anyway, going back to Marcus Vandt, he looks like a top man, and good luck to him. Wonder if he'd be quick in a racing car. Probably would, actually. A lot of the astronauts are very quick, were and are very quick drivers. And of course, there's that famous story of Jim Rathman, the Indy 500 winner, who then set up a Chevrolet dealership in Florida, and he was the guy that gave all the Chevys and all those ridiculously quick cars to all the astronauts. The first 7 and I think the next 8 all got these cars, brilliant, and did naughty things with them on the beaches of Daytona and thereabouts. So there we are. Yeah. So let's, with no more ado, I mean that's my intro, if you like. I'd just like to begin now. Let's begin with some questions, and then I'll probably go back into some other stuff at some point. So the first one is Sarosh Soman. Hi, Peter. Going to the soapbox video. That's the video I think I haven't actually put it out here, but you can see it on YouTube. This is a Red Bull video of Max and the other Red Bull drivers running soapboxes I think it's for the Canadian Grand Prix. No engine or anything, very narrow wheels, and Max wins the race in typical Max Verstappen style. Another thing that struck me, says Sarosh, was Yuki Tsunoda is the shortest and Max the tallest of the Red Bull drivers. If I assume that Max would be the heaviest and Yuki the lightest, and let me just get to the next question, underlines the point about how a driver with proper feel can make a big difference, since Max was the fastest and I think Yuki was the slowest. Just taking this point as an example. Yeah, I think obviously in a soapbox it makes a huge difference, the weight, and Max still managed to win it, and that would be that just shows, doesn't it? He's just very good at having the car pointing in a straight line and getting the thing on the fall line, and having great feel for just letting it run in its own space, and that's what he does very well in a Grand Prix car as well. So yeah, it's an interesting point. Of course, in Formula One, I'm sure we all know this, but in Formula One it's slightly different now, because Yuki being lighter and smaller doesn't help him at all in Formula One, because there's a minimum weight limit for the drivers of 80 kilos, and I don't think any of the drivers add up to 80 kilos, even with helmets and stuff, which they have to carry when they're somebody like Max is 70 maybe, something like that. Yeah, I would imagine. I imagine Yuki's in the 50s somewhere, very light. But yeah, in the old days, it would have been a huge advantage in a Grand Prix car to be light, but not today. And I think it's a good thing. They've evened that out, haven't they? Which is very good. And Sarosh continues. A lot of questions here from Sarosh, but that's a good question. I was doing brisk walking in my neighborhood and did some laps with short corners where I was focusing on having a stable platform without worrying on going fast corners. Guess what? The laps that I did with the short corners were faster than the laps where I was trying to go to fasting corners. Going fast in corners, you tend to learn a lot, one leg, and doesn't feel balanced. It's interesting. Can that translate to a car? It would mean more tyre wear, engine wear, overall vehicle wear. I found it fascinating. Well, I think it can. I mean, the whole point of a driver, I mean, it's in this order, isn't it? You've got to have the sensitivity, the balance, and the feel and the suppleness, and that God-given feel for the surface of the road, in order then to start thinking, what can I do differently from other racing drivers? And rather than just doing a sort of the smoothest possible line with a geometrical apex, can I do something better than that? And presumably they then all sit down and read Jim Clark at the wheel and realise that Jimmy turned in quite early to most of his corners, to the horror of Colin Chapman. And yeah, I'm obviously I'm being cynical there, but the reality is you can shorten the corner based on the undeniable truth that the corners join the straights, and it's the straights that are the critical thing. That's when you're going fastest and the car's travelling in a straight line. So you want to minimise the time the car is spending going through the corner, and you want to extend the straight, if you like, before the corner and from the exit of the corner. And the way you do that is to make the corner shorter, and you get in a bit earlier, you rotate the car at exactly the right moment, and then you get the car nice and straight for the exit, straight as possible. I say exactly the right moment for the rotation because, and what does that mean? It doesn't mean that if you use a corner that way and that is your technique, you're going to have a really cool, great and very fast rotation point. That doesn't mean that. It means there is a moment when you have to do that really boring thing, rotate the car. And typically a short corner driver will have a fairly slow minimum speed in the middle of the corner when he's doing that rotation, but he makes up for it completely with the longer straight he's got on exit. So whether that actually all translates into shoes and socks and walking around the path, I'm not 100% sure. I suppose it's definitely worth trying, isn't it? First super chat has come in from Quixer Squid. Thank you very much, Quixer. I'm just going to press it now. Last year's MXGP witnessed the highest viewership since 15. This year's Miami Grand Prix, it was the highest live Formula One audience ever. Will Daniel Suarez, NASCAR, be the only MX driver on linear TV next year? I don't know. I can't answer any of that really. It's Miami was this year's Miami Grand Prix was the highest live Formula One audience ever. What are we talking about? Television audience are we talking there? I'm not talking about circuit audience. I wouldn't have thought, because it wouldn't have been anything like as big as the Nürburgring in 1963 or any of the Indianapolis Formula One races for a start. I can't answer the question actually. I mean, here's a super chat. I can't even answer it. Will Daniel Suarez of NASCAR be the only MX driver on linear TV next year? I'll say yes. There you go. Yes, why not? Let's say yes to that one. Thank you for that question. Anybody else knows the answer to that, please chime in. I'll be very, very pleased to get your input. Okay, let's go back to some of the other questions here. That was that super chat. Here's another one. Oh no, here's another one. This is from Quixer Squid as well. Thank you very much. Perez is the only MX driver on the grid, Esteban Haas in 16, and many ORBR partners are either home or popular in MX. Is it wise for Horner to remove Checo before October 27 of this year? Well, I don't think it's wise at all, no. I think he should keep him, at least until the Mexican Grand Prix, as you say. But there's all this talk about a performance clause, and if he falls beyond that performance clause, the contract is null and void. It's 100 points, I think. I'm surprised that's been made public, and because it's made public, you have to wonder whether it's actually true or not. Of course, that's another point. Most of these details, how much he actually earned, what his performance bonus is, it's all, as soon as it's out on the internet, you think, is it real? Because it only takes one person to kind of make it up and 27 others all copy it. It becomes fact immediately. After 25 copies, it's fact. Usually the way, isn't it, with everything these days? But anyway, giving that the benefit of the doubt and assuming that is the case, you have to remember that they have re-signed Perez. So despite some pretty poor performances. And so they've done that. Why? Because he's still pretty good. They know he can still win a Grand Prix if things go right and the car's going quite well and the circuit's not that difficult. And they know he also brings a lot of money to the team. So there's two reasons why they re-signed him. Would they now get rid of him purely because he's had some really bad races? And he's fallen into the whole Riccardo Patrese syndrome of having signed the contract, he can relax now for 2 or 3 months because, you know, that deal's done now and he'll start racing again after the August break sort of thing. You know, and I mentioned that before in a live stream. You know, I used to drive James Hunt absolutely mad that any racing driver would allow his performance and his ability to put 100% into the effort of driving the car to be influenced by whether or not he got a contract signed. And because James's philosophy was just give it flat out every weekend, regardless, as most racing drivers would be for sure. And James 100% right there. But to me, Perez is definitely suffering from the whole Patrese syndrome thing that I talked about. And if he doesn't continue to get any better, obviously it's not only will Red Bull get rid of him, but will Perez suddenly realise he doesn't want to be a Formula One driver anymore and go and do something else because he can't continue as he is. But as I said to Cameron the other day when I chatted to him, I think it was the Monday after, last Monday, there are some easier circuits coming up for Checo. I can't imagine he's going to be, assuming the Red Bull's kind of in the ballpark in Hungary, which reasonable assumption, I think. I can't imagine he's going to be slow around Hungary because it's not that difficult. There are lots of corners that are good for Perez, lots of traction episodes at Hungary, which is what he's very good at. That's his forte. And I think he'll do quite well there. He'll inevitably do well in Baku. Obviously, places like Spa are not going to be great for him, but Spa's not as bad as Silverstone for a guy like Perez because Spa, I mean, Pouin is what it is. Yeah, he won't be quite as quick as Max through Pouin in qualifying, but he'll be okay there in the race. And Blanchimont is flat, and then you just brake for the chicane. You've got the hairpin acceleration. Eau Rouge is flat if it's dry. Top of the hill, yeah, it's a bit technical there, but it's understeery, and everybody's kind of, you know, it's not very good for anyone there. It's not a great bit of the Spa track. And then you've got that downhill left-hander, which again is a bit tiptoey, and he won't be great there. But yeah, overall, he won't be bad at Spa. I think he'll be okay at Monza. So, you know, I think Checo, it's just like all these things. I think he will actually start to be put in a couple of good performances because the circuits are going to be better for him, if that's the right phrase. I keep saying they're a bit easier. Who am I to say that? But you know what I mean. I mean, there's no way Hungary is as difficult as Silverstone in terms of putting together a complete lap. We all know that, even though some people may not want to admit that, but I think that's the case. You know, we still have circuits that are more difficult than others. Here's another super chat. Dinesh Srivatsa. Did Red Bull stop development to focus on 25? No, they haven't. No, it's they've still got development, budget and space and time. And 25 isn't going to be a massive development year anyway for Red Bull. It's as soon as they realize exactly what they're going to be doing for 26, that's the issue. And that's in 25. So at the moment, Red Bull has still got a bit in hand in terms of development of the car. But as I said before, the problem is not have Red Bull lost the way or they run out of budget. It's not that at all. It's that the regulations are running up to the end of 2025 and there are no changes to the technical regulations. So that's from 2022 to 25. It's quite a long time, basically, to have had no changes in the technical regulations whatsoever. The regulations were very different from those of 2021. And as we know, Red Bull were the only team that got it right for 2.5 years. But now everybody else, I say everybody else, sorry, McLaren, Ferrari, periodically, Mercedes, are starting to get to the point where Red Bull are kind of at. And there's not much more that anybody can do beyond that point because it's like a brick wall at the end of those regulations and there's a limit to what you can get out of the cars. And it's the shock is that it's taken McLaren, well, let's say Mercedes more likely. The shock is it's taken Mercedes this long to get to be this competitive, and that Ferrari still aren't fully competitive over, you know, the broad range of racetracks on which we appear. So that's the real shock. But you'd have to say by the end of this year, and certainly you'd hope by the beginning of 25, that Mercedes, McLaren and Ferrari are just about there with Red Bull, and we've got an unbelievably close 2025 season ahead of us. 26, totally different ballgame. New power, new chassis, new aerodynamics, new everything. So that'll be a whole new thing. But it's not that Red Bull haven't got more development. It's just that there isn't that much more you can do with these cars. You're just about at the end of where you're going. The other teams have got more development, obviously, because they're still not 100% there. But it's, you know, it's a very unusual Formula One situation to have almost no regulatory changes at the end of each season. Of course, there are a couple usually to do with safety and modifying this, modifying that, but nothing really affecting the general concept of the car. So that's where we're at. Another super chat. Thank you very much. This is from F1 Hensel. Thank you. Hi, Peter. Oscar had the speed already last year, but his race pace tyre management is improving a lot this year as well. Will you see him transcend the pace of Lando this or next year? Thanks. Well, I think they've got a very good team, McLaren. I'm not going to sidestep the question because you've asked a straight question. I don't think he will. No, I think Lando's got a wonderful rhythm to his driving, a great feel and softness to his driving and suppleness to his driving. The only thing he doesn't really have is the ability to think in terms of shortening the corner in the way that Max does or Lewis does, or indeed Oscar sometimes does and is trying to do. And that's why Oscar, I think, will be ahead of Lando reasonably consistently, not 50%, maybe 45% of the time, and has an advantage on those days that Lando won't be able to match, because one good short corner driver will always beat one good longer corner driver. It's just a fact. Shorter bit of lap apart from anything else, and you're using the tyres less, you're using everything less, and it's a more efficient way to drive. You've got a bigger sweet spot in which to adapt to crosswinds, react to crosswinds and other variables. If you're a longer corner driver, you're always on the edge of what you're doing. You've got to brake as late as possible. You've got to get the power on as soon as possible, but not overload the car. You've got to make sure you miss this bump, that bump. And that's why you see Lando making mistakes sometimes under pressure in qualifying. Or indeed, maybe in the race, you could argue at Silverstone. He wasn't able to adapt his driving to what was going on in the turbulence of the Mercedes in front of him, Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes. And because of that, his tyre wear was greater. Whereas a shorter corner driver, if you've got the ability to drive with shorter corners, let's put it that way, it's not the short corners per se, it's the ability to create those. That means you've got a different feel to driving the car. You've got a much bigger sweet spot in which to adapt to things, whether it be turbulence from the car in front, oil, hitting the bump at the wrong angle, doing this, that. You've got a bigger sweet spot because the car is flatter and it's more stable. Because if it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to drive with short corners anyway. So that's where it is. I'm not saying that Oscar... So the question is, why wouldn't Oscar then blow Lando away at every race? Well, because Lando's still very, very good at a lot of other things. It's a little bit like comparing Daniel Ricciardo with Max Verstappen. And, you know, in the end, Daniel said, I've had enough of this, I'm out. But I think he made a mistake, because I think if Daniel had stayed at Red Bull, I think he would have won more races than Perez. I really do. And I think he would have... There was still some areas, even today, there are probably some areas where Daniel is better than Max. Every driver has his own qualities, and Lando's got some unbelievable feel, and as I keep saying, rhythm. It's a wonderful thing to have, is a rhythm to your driving, because it gives you a consistency that ramps up as the race develops, and that's very good. And he's proving to be extremely good in qualifying, isn't he? Really good at putting in the lap at the right moment. Very, very good. So yeah, good question. Thank you very much. It's always fun watching that whole. I think I said that from the start, didn't I? That the Lando Oscar comparison was going to be one of the highlights of the year, this year, next year for sure. It's an amazing team. And from McLaren's point of view, from a technical point of view, they've got the full gamut. They've got the longer corner driver with the incredible touch and feel, Lando Norris, and they've got the shorter corner driver who's very compact and very very able to do a lot with the car, even when it's not quite right, which is great for the other end of the spectrum. And from the engineers, that's a really good thing to have. Brilliant thing to have. So, yes, lots of questions. I'm just trying to see if there's any other super chats, because I don't want to... okay. Matthew Brown, thank you very much, Matthew. $9.99, very kind. Hello, Peter. Hope you're doing well. I'm still scratching my head at how the Red Bull had no pace through most of the race, and then suddenly the hard tyres and put on, and it's a rocket ship again. Yeah, it was a bit odd, wasn't it? It was a really, as I said in my video after the race, you can look at Max's performance as a glass half full or glass half empty. You could say, for a Red Bull, it wasn't very good, and they never got it right, and they didn't have a lot of grip. He did an unbelievable job still to bring that thing home in P2. Or you could say he had a very good car, quite capable of finishing P2, but what was he doing for half the race? He was half asleep, or 2/3 of the race. I mean, you've got to give Max the benefit of the doubt and say, I'm sure he wasn't half asleep. I've reread a few of the things he said and listened to a few things that he said, and he keeps going on about how there was very little grip and balance, and he was absolutely on the edge of pushing that car as hard as he could without having some sort of major off with it, which would suggest that they were not right in terms of tyre temperature, which may be a factor of the ride height they were running and not getting the car quite right. I mean, I've said a couple of times in mitigation of Red Bull's relatively poor performances over the last couple of months that their car is very good for the average of the circuit layouts in any given championship year. Let's say this year, 24 racetracks. But there are going to be racetracks where they're never going to have a car that's going to be perfect for that circuit, because the car inevitably is an engineering compromise, which in itself is a beautiful thing, but it's inevitably an engineering compromise. And if this circuit requires really, really good high-speed grip, then maybe it's not going to suit that car, and vice versa. I thought going into Silverstone that this would be one of the circuits that would be absolutely perfect for the Red Bull, the RB20. And I was very surprised that it wasn't. And I can only go back to that famous old chestnut of, given the relatively cold ambience and the difficult conditions, quite cold, everybody wearing jackets and pullovers, that they never got the tyres to work as well as McLaren obviously did, or Mercedes obviously did. They were the hardest of the range and the Pirelli compound, and they never got it to work. Now, why would that be? It could be because they have got more efficient downforce, and they don't actually use the tyres as much in terms of in terms of scrubbing and slip angle on the tyre, which is maybe what the tyre needs in order to generate optimum tyre temperature. All of this is blackout stuff, and I don't think Red Bull, if we were to sit down tomorrow with any of the Red Bull people, Adrien, whatever, I'm not sure they would know exactly why they weren't super quick at Silverstone. I think it would have to be the relationship between the hardest in the range of the Pirelli tyres and the ambient temperatures and the track conditions. So yeah, and I wish it was more clear cut than that, but it isn't. And if it was, Red Bull would know, and they would have, been able to make the car a little bit quicker, I think. Now, as to why they were super quick at the end of the race, I think two things. One, Max was able, because they were the hard tyres, he was able to drive the thing as hard as he wanted to and needed to on a relatively light fuel load, and the track was dry and the sun was coming out, and all of a sudden he was starting to get some proper temperature and he could feel the car. I think it was that. Simultaneously, and it's a very important word, I think Lewis was obviously driving just within the edge of what he could do with the soft tyre, particularly on the left front, very wary that it was not going to be easy to get that soft tyre through to the checkered flag, and therefore was never at the absolute limit of the car. And simultaneously on top of that, Lando was initially in Lewis's turbulence, which did nothing for his ability to manage the tyres. And I think if Lando had not had that botched pit stop and had come out in the lead on the soft tyre, I think he would have won that race. I don't think his tyres would have gone off. as much as they did, and I think he would have beaten Lewis. But because of the botched pit stop, he was behind Lewis and he was in the turbulence, and that's not a good thing, particularly on a high-speed, medium-speed circuit, or medium-speed corners, high-speed circuit, in terms of looking after the tyres. And I think it was that. And because of that all going on, Max on the hard tyre he knew that tyre was going to last for the next 100 years, and he just went for it on a dry track. And obviously the car gave him more feel. He didn't feel as if he was on the edge of a razor blade all the time driving the thing. I think that's what happened. But a lot of it is tyre related. We shouldn't forget how sensitive these cars are because of the ride heights they're in and how difficult it is to get the cars to work, the car to work in terms of the downforce, the bouncing, the compound, the ambient. It's a difficult thing. It's not easy, as Red Bull are proving right now. I'm just flicking through for some other super chats if there are any. Yeah, it's a very presumptuous thing for me to say, but in general, because I'm flattered that there are so many questions always, and I never get through them all. I'm just suggesting I'm going to try and make a positive thing of always answering the super chats first and getting to them. And obviously, a good way of jumping the queue, therefore, is to do that. Nothing to do with commerce. It's just, that is a system and it kind of works, doesn't it? So I'm just making sure there are no others before I carry on. So yeah, I think it looks to be okay. And the other thing is not to ask questions twice, I suppose. And to give everybody a go, I suppose also don't ask too many questions. I'll always try to get to everybody, but try and limit the questions to one or two. I know some people, sort of the questions go on to 2 or 3 just because there isn't enough space, and that's fair enough. So Sarosh Sosman again, okay, all right, but this looks like a good one. Hi Peter, Sajaki does a lap in commentary together and he stresses on being smooth with pedal application, steering inputs, braking inputs. I do see that he constantly does micro corrections. Is that because however smooth you are, the cars will respond in a way that you need to react, since there are lots of changing dynamic events going on? Yeah, of course it is that, yeah. And as I said before, imagine a billiard table or a snooker table, and you've got the balls in the middle with the triangle around them all contained, and you've got 4 people lifting the table now, 1 on each corner, and then a 5th person takes off that triangle, and now you have to stop any of the balls touching the green felt around the edge of the billiard table. It's an indication of the sorts of dynamic energies and loads going through a racing car, indeed any car, but particularly a racing car in this case. As it goes into a corner, you've got dynamic forces all over, and it's a question of managing all those. And as Jackie always said, he wants a nice stable platform. Sterling Moss said that, interestingly enough. Jim Clark said that, interestingly enough. Michael Schumacher said that, interestingly enough. Lovely stable platform in terms of what you do with the brakes, and then you feel where you are, and then you get the rotation point exactly when you want to have it. You don't just brake as late as you possibly can and risk being unstable. And because what will happen is eventually you won't hit the brake pedal exactly the same way, and you'll lock a rear or an inside front, or even a left front there, or an outside front, as they often do today, particularly in Baku. It seems very weird. Or you'll hit some oil, or something will happen. The brakes will go, or something will be weird with the brake fluid, whatever it is. And brake by wire may not be working as well as it should. And you've got no margin then if you are just trying to brake as late as possible at every corner. And then you have the only way then to cope is to come back a little bit. And then you do that, you're going slower. And that doesn't happen to drivers like Max or Lewis. And that's how Lewis beat Nico Rosberg at the US Grand Prix that time, when the track got very oily and the wind came up, I think. It's just because Lewis had a bigger sweet spot in which he could operate. And when the car started to move around, he could just sort of correct it a little way with the pedals, usually with the pedals more than the steering, which we don't get to see or hear very much. So there we go. Lou Sequoia. Hi Peter, why is it that some of the drivers have to choose what tyres they want? Isn't driving alone enough pressure? Well, yeah, you wonder if some of that's for show or not, or to mislead some of the other teams. Because when the radio came out to Lando, Lando, you got the choice. What would you like? Medium, soft, hard, blah, blah. If you want to cover Lewis, do this. You want to cover Max, do that. That was that was obviously long before he actually came in. And by the time that radio came out, McLaren had already decided that he was going to be on the soft. Now, I didn't hear what Lando said. I want to be on the soft, but I think it's quite a good thing, don't you? It's quite good for TV, and it's quite good. Shows a lot of confidence in the driver as well, that they just tell him what to do. And we've seen at Mercedes a few times when Mercedes just put Lewis on a tyre that he doesn't want, notably the Dutch Grand Prix a couple of years ago. And, it hasn't worked well, has it? It hasn't gone well to the checkered flag, particularly when the other driver ducks in and gets a different tyre. So, yeah, I think it's almost like the teams, okay, all right, well, you decide, you take the blame if this doesn't work out. Isn't it a bit of that? If I was an engineer, that's probably what I would do. It doesn't work at Ferrari, of course, because there's so many things they give Charles, so many options. Question. I see even with the new race engineer, it's still question Charles. Why does he have to say that? It's pretty obvious, isn't it, if it's a question or a statement? And Charles usually, well, that's not what I want to know. Tell me what I want to know. It's still going on. What did happen to Charles Leclerc at Silverstone, by the way? I mean, for us Charles Leclerc fans, it's a bit worrying, I must say. And I don't know what to say about that. Speaking of small corrections and the wet, I thought it was quite interesting to see that this, let's have a look at this, wet races. This came out on the internet a bit earlier this week. And I should credit Formula One by you, Checkmate 331, of wet weather performances. Michael Schumacher, 36%. Wet weather wins is at the top of the list, from Lewis Hamilton, Ayrton Senna, Max Verstappen, Jenson Button, Damon Hill, Fernando Alonso, Sebastian Vettel, Alan Prost, Nigel Mansell, Terry Boutsen, Sergio Perez, Kimi Raikkonen, Olivia Panis, etc. It's interesting. I mean, there you can see it all. I'm slightly confused. Not confused. I'm sure there was something else in there saying this is starting from this date, because obviously, as I showed with Pedro Rodriguez, it's unbelievable wet weather driver. And what about Jackie Stewart? He wasn't bad in the wet. And what about Jim Clark and Sterling Moss and Taffy Von Trips and so many that you can remember in the wet. I mean, James Hunt wasn't exactly slow in the 76 Japanese Grand Prix, nor was Mario Andretti. So on that basis, I'm going to read a little bit from Jim Clark at the wheel. You're going to like this, I think. I've talked about this before, but this is in his own words. 63 Belgian Grand Prix wet race, okay? He's in a Lotus 25. At the end of the opening lap, Graham Hill was still on my tail, but I didn't know until, this is Jim Clark at the wheel, paperback version, rare edition, American edition, including 1965. It's not that rare, but anyway, I like to think it is. Graham Hill was on my tail, but I didn't know until later that we had both left everyone else behind and we had a 10-second lead. We stayed this way for quite a while, and then I began to get the old gearbox trouble again. It started dropping out of top gear, and on Spa, this is not funny. This is Spa, the old circuit, of course. You wind the car up to, say, 9,500 revs on the straight, when suddenly all hell is let loose, and you make a grab for the lever and pull it back into gear before you put the revs right off the clock. Once this happens, you start waiting for it to happen again. In other words, you're just jumping out of top gear. Once this happens, you start waiting for it to happen again. By now, my problem was becoming acute. Here I was with Graham Hill on my tail and pressing, and a gearbox which threatened to do something nasty at any moment. On the main straight at Spa, there's a kink in the middle, and though I decided to drop 300 revs when going through this kink for safety's sake, I was still doing about 150 miles an hour. This meant that as I approached the kink, I would be holding the gear lever in place with my right hand and moving my left hand down to the bottom of the steering wheel. I did this because the car has a tendency on this flat out, on this kink, the master kink, to move from one side of the road to the other. And I often needed correction, opposite lock at 150 miles an hour, in other words. By keeping my hand low on the wheel, I could twirl the steering wheel round with one hand and hold the slide, but doing this for lap after lap was not in the least bit funny. So, if that's not good wet weather driving, I would like to know what is, and I'd like to know why he's not on that list there. Thank you very much. Apart from a lot of others as well. There's obviously a cut-off point, but it's a rather strange one. He's got Terry Boutsen in there, but not to have, I don't know, Mario Andretti, for example. It seems incredibly odd. Or Gilles Villeneuve. Why? I don't get that. Anyway, that's that. Yeah, this is quite fun, isn't it? Anyway, let's go back to the questions and have a look at where we're at. And I think there's another super chat here. Probably not. See? Oh, yeah. Chris Ward, thank you very much, Chris. I saw your convo with Scarbs on the 2026 regs. This new active aero that the regs are bringing seems to get rid of within DRS. In your view, does that get rid of the artificial of DRS overtakes? No, it makes it worse, I think, because they've got even more artificial aero on the car, haven't they? Front and rear now. So they need to get rid of it altogether. I don't know why they're continuing with that. It's just, you know, they've got to bow down to this whole thing of we've got to have as many overtakes as possible. That is the judge of a good race. If it's got 47 overtakes, it's got to be better than a race that only had 5. Of course, that's complete rubbish, because it could be that the race that only has 5 overtakes has 5 unbelievable overtakes, all pulled off at exactly the right moment after exerting incredible pressure for 42 laps. But of course, mere statistics are much more important than reality these days, and we've got to have these overtakes, and so we've got to have as much opportunity to flatten the wings and make it faster and better. So I'm dead against it. Always have been, always will be. It's getting worse. I think my problem is not so much the overtakes, as we said before, but the speed differential and the problems that brings. A lot of people might think that's great TV, but I don't think it's very skillful to give a driver a 10 kilometre per hour speed differential advantage over the car in front, just purely artificially. I don't think that's racing, and I'll always say that. So, but thanks for your question, Chris. It's just annoyed me now, thinking about it even. Hamza Chowdhury, without just stating existing tracks, what aspects do you look for in an F1 circuit? Fast corners, technical corners, long straights, runoff type, wide track width, elevation, etc. Well, as I said before, rather than go to all these cities because they want to say they got a Miami Grand Prix or a Vegas Grand Prix, I think they should have been more creative and gone to these people with the money and said, right, instead of doing a street race, which is going to be unbelievably annoying and difficult to put together, and after 2 years there's going to be a lot of complaints about the traffic and the noise, and we have to go through that every year. It's the reason Bernie never wanted to do street races very much, and it's just a pain in the neck. Why don't we build the equivalent of Bernie super circuits where it's easy to get to, in other words, away from a city, but not too far away. You can still call it the Vegas Grand Prix. But instead of building a Bernie super circuit, build renditions of the great tracks. I don't see why that's such a difficult thing to have pulled off. The Nürburgring, Nordschleife, or South Schleife, whatever you mean, the real South Circuit. Brands Hatch, I could name many. Saint-Gervais, wonderful circuits. You could bring them to life again, and you could have them with all the modern facilities, all the safety you need in terms of runoff area, and you could have them in these places. And wouldn't it be unbelievable to be going back to the old Nürburgring, 15-mile lap, but with television cameras everywhere and unbelievable viewing for the spectators? But you can do it in the middle of the desert in Vegas. Why not? Saudi Arabia, money's there, do it. So that would be my thing. I mean, when I look at great corners, I would say I'd like to say Paddock Bend at Brands Hatch, but actually I thought Hawthorne Dingle Dell, or Hawthorne and then Westfield, were the 2 great corners at Brands Hatch. The old Silverstone, Stowe and Club, definitely turns 1 and 1A at Suzuka. The new Silverstone, Beckett's Complex, Copse. Where else? I love turn 9-10 in Bahrain, still, as the Bahrain as we have today. I think it's a great bit of road. Anywhere where you have to brake with load on the car, and then preferably not that slow, medium speed, and then you got a long straight afterwards to reward or penalise how well you've done that braking. I think that's a great bit of design if you can pull that off. Not many circuits have that. They just have slow corners, and then it's not much load, lateral load. It's just all horizontal, braking load. So that'd be what I'd go for. Thinking about current Spa. Yeah, Pouin was my favourite corner at current Spa for sure. Although whenever I go and watch there, it's always a bit disappointing. They just go, wow. So, well, that was Perez, and here's Max. Wow. And it's quite difficult to tell the difference standing trackside. But, of the current new circuits. I'm trying to think if there's anything that stands out massively. Not really. It's a bit disappointing, isn't it? I always thought Turkey was a good circuit. I like the combination. I suppose in general, I like the combination of fast, medium speed corners and slow corners. And so Silverstone, in that respect, is a very, very good circuit. Has all those things. It just doesn't have a lot of flow to it, Silverstone. That's my only complaint about it. It must be quite irritating, I would have thought, as a driver. I know Lewis says he loves it, but different reasons, isn't it? Because it's his home race. Why wouldn't he? Foon, hello Peter. Do you see any fireworks between Lewis and Charles as we saw in Mercedes? Yeah, I do. Well, do I? I do if Lewis starts to go quicker than Charles. I don't think it will be the other way. I think if Charles is usually a tenth quicker, a bit like George, I think Lewis will always be confident that he can sort of handle Charles in the race, or at least take it to Charles in the race. If it's the other way round, I can see Charles starting to get extremely annoyed by the whole situation and going to Nicholas Todd and saying, what have we done here? Why didn't we just keep it as it was and tell Fred to keep Carlos Sainz? And even then, it's not that easy. I mean, Carlos drove pretty well over the weekend at Silverstone. When you look at what Charles did, if the car was as difficult as Charles made it look, then Carlos Sainz did an unbelievable job, didn't he? So another one from Chris Ward, another super chat. So they are keeping the within 1 second rule for the active Aero DRS to activate. Thought they might delete that. Did you see the DC Max driving RB? No, I didn't. No, that would have been good. No. Yeah, I think to me, whether it's the 1 second rule, half second, whatever it is, it's kind of moot, isn't it? It's just the fact that it's there in the first place is annoying, I think. That's my feel. I just wish we could get rid of it altogether, and we're not. And it's not necessarily because I'm a purist. I just think it's detracting from the art of defence, which is just as skillful as attack, I think. And because the whole world is now loaded towards overtakes, the art of defence is just sort of shoved into the corner of something that's not really important anymore. But it used to be incredibly important, and it's a skill. It really is a skill, putting your car in exactly the right position, which is what, as I said, after the Austrian Grand Prix, which is exactly what Max was doing going into turn 4 in Austria. It was a classic example of skillful defence, of timing his moment of moving slightly to the left, approaching a right-hander, which he doesn't normally do, but a lot of drivers do, so why should we stop Max doing that? Slightly to the left, just at the moment when Lando was thinking, I'm going to go left. And from Lando's point of view, it was he's moving under braking. But he wasn't. He was just doing what Perez does, just moving slightly to the left for the right-hander. Absolutely perfect. Who says the mirrors don't work in a Formula One car anymore? So, yeah. Anyway, it's all... I don't know. What's it going to be like in 26? I keep trying to imagine what it's going to be like with 50% electrification. And what they're going to sound like. Are they going to sound about the same? Maybe a little bit throatier, maybe. But I doubt it. I doubt it's going to be a lot different, put it that way. Another one from Foon. Peter, me again. Maybe a controversial opinion, but I feel like if Lewis or Charles had been in Lando's position in Austria, they wouldn't have made contact. Takes on this. I'm not so sure there. As I said, I think to me the real culprit in Austria was DRS, and it was the speed differential that you're landed with if you get a run on the car in front of you and you're lapping within about a second of what that car's doing, either ahead or behind. You're left with this massive speed differential as you go into a hard braking area. That massive speed differential isn't as great going into a medium speed corner when you don't have as much hard braking, but going into a tight corner, the speed differential is unbelievable. And that's what it was. It was like Lando thought, oh, what do I do here? I'm going so quick, and he's going so slowly. Well, I'll go left because there's no room on the inside. It was that sort of thing. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go left, do a double dummy. It wasn't all that. It was just ridiculous speed differential. That's what it was. So I don't think it would have made any difference whether it was Charles, Lewis, Max, or anyone driving. It would have been the same, in my opinion. Another super chat, thank you very much. Stalin Senpai. Is Red Bull sacrificing the second seat for development time? They have quite a high chance of going 4th or even 5th in the constructors. Also, please refund my first super chat. I hope that's a joke. But if it wasn't a joke, I don't know if that's doable. I hope it is. Why would you want a refund? Didn't I answer the question, or didn't I read it? I don't know. Whatever. What do I think about that? I don't know. I don't really think about the Constructors Championship very much. I only think about the drivers. Oh, you're not allowed to say that. You have to say the Constructors Championship's so important. And I know it is from a money point of view, but they've all got too much money anyway. So, yeah, I'm only thinking of the Drivers' Championship. And if you want to win the Drivers' Championship, which was the Michael Schumacher philosophy, you give me Rubens Barrichello in the other car, or Eddie Irvine, or Felipe Massa. I don't want Mika Hakkinen, thank you very much. And he was right. Every point counts, and that's what the Red Bull thing is. So, yeah, the constructors thing, maybe they'd be scoring more points right now. But as I say, just wait up and just wait and see. I can't imagine Perez will be slow in Hungary. If he is slow in Hungary, then he needs to stop, I think, because it's not going to be a very difficult circuit for him. So that one, I've had that one. This is the trouble, you see, the super chats keep popping up again as if I haven't answered them. That's why I always find this a little bit annoying. Not you guys, just the system here. It's all a bit difficult. Last one from Foon. Why does McLaren have such indecision with Lando and not Oscar? Oscar seemed to have a clear path of what tyres he needed at the end, where Lando seemed clueless. I don't think he did he? I mean, I'm assuming that he said, if whatever Lewis is on, I want the softs. Isn't that what he would have thought? Because he imagined he was going to be leading the race and didn't want to be on mediums if Lewis was on softs. So logical to be on softs and control the pace and be in front. Problem was they messed up the pit stop. And in doing that, he was in Lewis's slipstream, and turbulence, which meant that he was very little chance of looking after the tyres. And now, in retrospect, if they'd known they were going to mess up the pit stop, he would have run mediums. But he didn't at the time. And if that choice was Lando, I give him 100% thumbs up for that, because I think it was the right choice to win the race. And it shows that he wants to win races. He doesn't want to go around finishing second. So, and then Oscar's in the other car saying, the medium's a good tyre. Yeah, of course it's a good tyre. Nobody doubted that. We all knew it was a good tyre. But the point is, Lewis is on the soft. So what are you going to do? And so I don't think it was indecision. And I think with Oscar, don't forget with Oscar, he is the younger, newer driver. And if there's one driver in the team who is very compliant and does what he's told, because he's the new arrival, fair enough, that's how it's going to be. Okay, you're on the mediums, but we're not really sure. Maybe the soft is a good tyre as well, so we're going to put Lando on the soft. And fair enough, McLaren can do that. They've got a very good balanced driver pairing like that. More difficult to do that with George and Lewis. More difficult to do that with Carlos and Charles. So let's have a look. Aaron Lee. He's got multiple questions incoming, so yeah, I'll have a look. As I say, I don't want to do too many of these because I want to try and give everybody a decent shot. Hi Peter, when teams decide to bid for contracts to produce spec parts, to what extent are they seeking a competitive advantage by obtaining the right to design a part that works well for their car, as opposed to it being a profit-driven decision? Along similar lines, what are the main considerations when a team is deciding on the number of teams they supply engines to? Again, is it more performance or profit-driven decision? I also want to thank you. You were right. I really enjoyed your chat with Scarbs about the 26 car. Really good. Thank you very much. I think it's the FIA that tend to get involved. Obviously, the teams have their input. They say, no, we don't want that tag, that McLaren applied electronics. Terrible. So many problems with it. Yeah, but never really cost you a race win, did it? It's still winning races. Oh, yeah, but, we want our Magneti Marelli or whatever. They listen to it. They know that the teams are going to have their own agenda. But it's the FIA did quite a good job, I think, with awarding those contracts, and because you would have thought it was a complete minefield, but it's worked out pretty well. The last time I can remember any sort of issue, really, I mean, the fuel sensor thing is really good now. A friend of mine runs that company, actually. He's very impressed. It's a very impressive setup. The last time we had a real issue was with the fuel, when we had refueling, and it was the tanks and the hoses, and getting consistency between those was a real issue. That's not to say there were other people out there that wanted to do it. So I think I think the FIA, we got to give them credit for doing quite a good job with all of that. And what was the last thing? Engine supply. Well, the engine supply thing is, you've got to be able to supply a certain percentage of the field. I don't know what it is these days. I would imagine it's in the region of 40%. You've got to be capable of doing that. But equally, obviously, there's nothing to stop you just producing engines for one team if you want to, i.e. Renault. So, as they do. And in the old days, it was always an advantage if you ran the engine just with one team. Cosworth DFE with Lotus, good example. The minute they started giving the engines to other teams in year 2, 68, Lotus were not quite as competitive because other teams had the engine. But these days, that doesn't seem to be the case. And there is an argument for saying Renault would be doing a better job as a power unit builder, designer, supplier if they had more teams, if they had more than just themselves. That's a bit of a conundrum, and how that will go in 26 with Honda coming in again, and with Aston Martin, and then Ford teaming up with Red Bull Powertrain. It'll be another interesting thing, won't it, to see how that actually goes. So, is it? Yeah, I mean, obviously there's money to be made. They'll all make money, but it's not. It's more to do with performance and making sure the thing actually works. And it's not like Formula 2 or Formula 3 where Dallara are under massive pressure to produce a car at a certain price, and they know that if they could just spend a little bit more money on this or that, they wouldn't have guys stalling on the grid as much. But in Formula 1, I think my impression is that most of the stuff is performance driven rather than just the cheapest deal. Higgs Boson. Hi Peter, what could McLaren have done better during the race? Poor Oscar, thank you. Yeah, Oscar was a victim of that stacked pit stop thing, doing the extra lap. But I think, as I just said before, I think Lando would have won that race had he not had the pit stop problem. It's interesting, isn't it? Since the whole thing's become closer and Red Bull have lost a lot of their margin, they have had a problem, i.e. the pit stop in Austria, and now McLaren are having a problem in Silverstone. I wonder whether we're going to continue to see that, and I think we will. When the pressure mounts, that's where errors come in. Not necessarily pit stops, but also strategy, logistics, how you run the tires, things like that. All those pressure points. It's very easy when you're winning every race easily, not to have lots of time to think about those. But when you've got to do things under pressure, errors will creep in because we're all human beings. And we saw it at McLaren. I can't remember the last time in recent history when McLaren have had a bad pit stop, but they did, under pressure with Lando. And which is very unusual because usually it's the driver who comes in first because the mechanics haven't done anything for 25 minutes or 30 minutes and they've been standing around a bit, and then the second car comes in and they're all warmed up and ready to go. But in this occasion it was Lando's thing. But I think if he'd had a proper pit stop and he'd come out in front of Lewis, I think Lando would have won that race. And I think it was the slipstream and the turbulence from the Mercedes that caused the problem. So had he won that race, we'd all be saying, oh wow, unbelievable management by McLaren, wouldn't we? It was just that they had the pit stop problem. And it's not much point going into those because it's human error and it's not fair because those guys do a brilliant job, all those mechanics. But I would say this, it was the third race in a triple header and everybody is absolutely shattered at the moment. And this is like 5 days after the race, let alone the day of the race or the days building up to the race. The stress and the physical effort of the team, let alone the drivers and what they go through, of the team people and the guys in the pit lane, guys and girls in the pit lane, has never been worse, I think. It's been unbelievable. And don't forget how difficult it is traveling these days as well, how stressful traveling is, just in general, ever since, COVID, Brexit, whatever it is. So everything's worse. Everything's more difficult. Everything's stressful. And it's difficult, especially Silverstone with the traffic and everything. If you're a mechanic, you probably didn't get more than a couple of hours sleep on the Saturday night. And so it's no surprise, things creep in. You've got all these races this year. There are going to be more errors like that for sure. Aaron, again, fascinating and lots of insights, not discussed elsewhere, but about how it affects the racing philosophy and the challenges of striking a balance between the technical and sporting objectives. Hope all well. Yeah, very good, thanks. Thanks very much. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a human thing, the stress level of the mechanics and the engineers too, not just the mechanics and the support staff, whether it be in the motorhome, catering, whether it be pit garage preparation, whether it be spare parts, a million people behind the scenes and everybody's, knackered. Blaze X1. Hi Peter, your video on the British Grand Prix was amazing and captured perfectly the essence of Lewis's win. What is it about Silverstone that makes Lewis so good around there technically? Thanks very much, Blaze. Very kind. Well, I kind of tried to touch on that in the Saturday video when I pinpointed the difference between Lewis and George going into Beckett's, and how George has this thing of grabbing 7th just as he's going in, and he's got quite high revs on the engine. I think it was 11.6 or something, and he's just leaning on the left rear, which is how he drives. Not that long a corner, but he's very, he puts a lot of load on that left rear and left front just to give him the feel he needs, and bang, like that in, a bit like Fernando Alonso. Whereas Lewis was keeping it in 8th as long as he could, and just coming out of the brakes and coming out of the throttle a little bit more gradually, and just letting the car float in 8th, just being much kinder to everything, and everything was more tranquil, if that's the right word for a Formula One car. Everything was a bit more delicate. And whilst I think that was an advantage for George in qualifying, and I think it was one of the reasons he was on the pole, I think also Lewis didn't get a great run out of the last corner. Looking at the telemetry, it looks like he's off the throttle a little bit longer, coming out of that long last right-hander, slow right-hander. I think it was that as well. But in the race, when the conditions started to get very touchy with rain and they're on slicks, that approach of Lewis into Beckett's, that floating approach, it was how he got closer to George. I know George then had the water problem, the temperature went off, and it was a matter of time. But nonetheless, Lewis was just brilliant in those conditions, I thought. And similarly, in the wet on Saturday, Lando was doing that floating thing, not so much into Beckett's, but he was doing it at the end of the first long straight into that long left-hander by the BRDC clubhouse, Luffield, I think it is. And Lando was doing the same thing. Compared with, even with Oscar, he was just going in. There was no throttle, no brakes, nothing happening, and just boom, like that. Beautiful. And that, I think, to me, is the epitome of the art, that ability to let the car float. Doesn't necessarily pay off a lot in the drive, but it's a really good thing to have in the wet in your repertoire. Max was not doing that, but he was very good on not overlapping, just coming out of the throttle and then braking. You could just see the two lines, doing that in perfect synchronization. But Lewis definitely has that lovely feel of not wanting to push the engine too much. It's the difference between Prost and Senna. When Senna wanted to get the last 50 revs out of the engine, and Prost was always happy, like Nigel Mansell, to drive a little bit under that, and if necessary, not to be flat out on the straight, just to save the engine. And Nigel was the same. And Carlos Reutemann, another driver I worked with, was the same. If you can stay in 8th for longer, do it. Don't just go into 7th. And he often used to look at Alan Jones doing that. And good corner for that was Buenos Aires, Parkway Almirante Brown, turn 1-2, quick left-hander section. And Carlos would be going through there in 4th. And was a little bit low on revs coming out, but Alan would always go down to 3rd. Yeah, 3rd, that's right. And Carlos couldn't believe Alan would do that. But Alan was very quick there, and he was just leaning on the left rear with, and getting 4th on exit, whereas Carlos would be, much smoother. Smooth is the wrong word, much more flowing, I suppose, is the right word. It's just a difference in style. I'm not sitting here pontificating and saying that is better. I'm just saying, to me, Lewis looks to be in perfect harmony with that Silverstone lap, because I said earlier, it's not a lap where it looks like there's a lot of flow, because there are so many different sections to it. This bit's slow, then there's a straight, then there's a fast bit, then there's another straight, then there's a slow bit. It's all kind of all over the place. And yet Lewis has this ability to make all that work, and he does it in a very fluid way. And I wish we could see more of his footwork with cameras. We can't, because there's no room for lighting in the footwell area, and we'll never get to see that. But if ever we got to see Lewis's footwork in synchronization with his steering inputs, I think everyone would start to get a feel for the differences. As it is, we can only look at telemetry, listen with our ear, and certainly watch what he's doing off board, as somebody said the other day. It's a good phrase, isn't it? So there we go. Another super chat, I think. Safak Yokohama. Thank you very much, Safak. Hi, Peter. Do you think the rumour that McLaren informed Red Bull about their engine is true? If so, is there something that they know about the new Mercedes engine for 2026, you think? No, I don't. I think at the moment, everybody's kicking around ideas, and there's a lot of new technology that's going to be discovered between now and going firm with everything in 26. I think it's just more, a sure bet is that Mercedes are not going to get it wrong. That's for sure. I think, if you're Zach Brown, you're thinking, I took that big gamble to leave Honda, which was free engines, and paid 23 million in 1 year to go to, or whatever it was, 26, to go to Mercedes customer engines. And it's paid off, and now we're winning Grand Prix, and we're right up there, maybe even ahead of Red Bull. Maybe going to win the Constructors Championship, whatever they're thinking. But I think he's also thinking, it's a bit of a question mark 26, and a sure bet is to be with Mercedes, and so we'll go with Mercedes. Thank you. I mean, what else can they do? They can start to try to look for a new manufacturer. They could go, maybe, I don't know, even whether, I can't imagine Red Bull powertrain with Ford are going to do more than the two teams they've got. I'm not going to go with Ferrari, are they? So what else can they do anyway? So not going to go with arch rivals Aston Martin, I don't think. So yeah, I think it's that. So we're on that one. Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Very kind. But it's interesting. It'll be fascinating to see how 26 does work out. I'm not actually, I was watching one of my heroes, Terry Newell. I was watching him talk about potential for electrification in rallying, and he just said, no, we need the noise. And he's right. Blaze X1 says, Blaze 11, could you do an interview with Lewis Hamilton, Max, on the subtleties of driving? Nowadays, the questions they are asked are so boring and bring about the same PR response. With you, the interview wouldn't be surface level. Yeah, at some point I will. I don't know how. I am scheduled, I think, to be talking to both of them at some point before the end of the year. Not necessarily for this YouTube channel, but I will talk to them. But I have to say, I'm not convinced that if I said to Max, let me think how I can phrase it. If I said to Max, you got this ability to shorten the corner and this wonderful feel for the right transition point and rotation of the car and minimizing the downside of everything and looking after the tires. How do you do that? Where's it come from? Or whatever. I'm not sure he would know what I was talking about, because I'm not sure Max, and this is not a criticism at all, I'm not sure he ever thinks about that. He just does it. Possibly the engineers say, are you aware that you're doing this, Max? And he'll say, oh yeah, okay, good. But I'm not sure he thinks about it. That's what makes these racing drivers very interesting people. They just do it without knowing that they're doing it. None of them are actually sitting around thinking, apart from maybe Oscar Piastri, who does seem to take an interest in these things. I can't imagine Yuki Tsunoda, for example, is out there thinking, wow, look what Lewis is doing into Beckett's, or look what Max is doing into Luffield. Why is he doing that? He just thinks, I'm Yuki Tsunoda, I'm mega quick. If I was in that car, I'd be winning a Grand Prix. Isn't that what they all think these days, these young guys? Nobody can brake later than me. Nobody can get the power sooner on me. Nobody can hold a power slide better than me. Just give me the right car. That's how they're all trained to think, isn't it? Work with the engineer. And so I'm not sure it'd be a very enlightening conversation. I've had a couple with Lewis, and I remember after Brazil 1 year saying, amazing. I mean, when you do turn in early, Lewis, it does help in the wet in terms of finding the grip level. And he said, yeah. And I asked Michael once if he felt Ralph had the same ability to get into the corners as quickly as he did, as early as he did. And he thought about it. He said, because he never really liked to talk about Ralph or Ralph about Michael, if you ask Ralph. And he just said, no, he's got the same signature, definitely. And he did. I mean, he was at much shorter corners than Juan Pablo Montoya, Ralph Schumacher. He's good. When things were good, he was good. Then he got paid too much money by Toyota, and that was that. A bit like Daniel Ricciardo. Blaze. Should Charles be getting worried about his and Ferrari's form and Lewis incoming into the team next year? Well, it kind of depends if Adrien Newey is going there, doesn't it? If Adrian's going there, I don't think anybody at Ferrari should be worried. They should be thinking, come on, Adrien, get on with it. Stop all this gardening leave rubbish. Get on with it. So they've got no worries. No, Charles is the last person in the world to think, oh, I'm not driving very well. Lewis has just won. I could be in trouble next year. Charles is thinking, what's going on? I'm quicker than Lewis Hamilton. He's just won the British Grand Prix. Ferrari at the moment, Carlos Sainz had a better day, and I'm Charles Leclerc. What's going on? I'm very, very quick. I'm the fastest driver in the world. I should be winning Grand Prix. What's going on? That's what he'll be thinking, and he'll be constantly trying to understand what's happening. And he won't have any explanation because nobody at Ferrari knows what's going on either. Jay, thank you, Jay. Another super chat. Did you see the Max remarks concerning his visibility issues post Silverstone 21? He never talked about it before, but it seems he took a big hit on the head. Oh, that's interesting. No, and somebody else, Nelson Piquet, I think said relatively recently, oh yeah, throughout 86, was it? He had that shunt, or 87? Throughout 87, dizziness, headaches after that shunt at Imola. Right, he never ever complained about it at all. When I was at every race with him, he never complained about it once, but certainly something he talks about now. And Max, maybe. Well, he didn't do too badly, did he, in 21? He was always pretty quick back end of that year with that vision thing. I didn't see that, but am I surprised? I'm not surprised. It was a bit of a bang. I am surprised that if his vision wasn't absolutely as it should be, that he didn't do something about that. Or maybe he did, and he got it to be about as good as he could get it. But it's a bit of a strange thing, isn't it? Because that's the first thing you worry about with a racing driver is vision, peripheral vision particularly. And next time I see him, I'll ask him about that. Source, the Red Bulletin. Okay. Well, it's the Red Bulletin. That's the Red Bull in-house magazine. That must be true. So imagine what he would have done if he'd got decent vision in 21. Doesn't bear thinking about. That's why he ran into Lewis all those times. Yeah, funny. M1, M12, X12. Thanks for your always thoughtful and balanced perspective and insights. Well, that's very kind of you to say so. If Dennis Jenkinson, the doyen of British journalism, sadly no longer with us, read that, he'd say, well, there you go, Windsor, typical, too balanced, nothing more boring than a balanced journalist. You must be more biased. That's what he would tell me. And for being so generous with the time you devote to these live streams and your conversations with Cameron. Oh, thank you very much. That's kind. That's very kind. Cameron's a top man, isn't he? Another thing I like about spending time with Cameron is because, as you've probably gathered, I don't spend that much time on social media. In fact, I don't really spend any time on social media. Assuming YouTube is not, in this case, social media. I spend a lot of time with YouTube, obviously, because I enjoy it. But all the other stuff, I don't really... A, I don't have time for it, and B, I don't spend any time on it anyway. So I kind of think Cameron's a cool guy. He's very social media savvy. If I do some stuff with him, it'll go out on social media, so that's covered all that stuff. That's kind of how I think. Completely erroneously, I'm sure. But it just shows, doesn't it, that I don't really know what I'm doing. What accounts, this is info, same person, what accounts for the differences among teams in a spec series like Formula 2? In particular, what explains the lackluster records so far of the two heavily hyped Prema drivers, Antonelli and Behrman? Yeah. Well, I was asking myself exactly the same question when I was watching Behrman make that unbelievable start to the feature race, getting up to P2 and then spending the rest of the day dropping back to P8 and then retiring or whatever happened. And I just, it's unbelievable, isn't it? It's unbelievable there can be so much difference between one team and another when they're all running spec Dalaras and spec engines and spec tyres and spec electronics, and also that Prema are so good anyway, winning Formula 3, doing this and that. I just can't get it right in Formula 2. Bring back Frederick Vesti is obviously the answer. Because when he was with Behrman, he was very close and he often out-qualified and beat Behrman, but Behrman was good. But Prema were always on it. They were really good. So I'm wondering whether there's a bit of an engineering savvy understanding of what the car needs in order to go quickly, consistently quickly, problem at Prema. You couldn't expect Antonelli to bring much with him because he's a rookie. And Behrman, you would expect him to be absolutely right on it. Being a Ferrari Academy driver, he's now got his Formula 1 drive with Haas, etc., etc. Should be very cool. But maybe there's something there that Vesti brought that isn't there anymore. In which case, somebody give Vesti a drive, please. A proper drive. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? They can be so off the pace. I mean, got to say here, full marks to Campos, my mates up the road. And I say that because I always had a soft spot for Adrien Campos, sadly no longer with us. But his son is doing an outstanding job at Campos. Right on it. Every category, good drivers, unbelievable. Abnor Shala. Hello, Peter. I noticed the whole weekend Lewis Hamilton was faster than George Russell on Sector 2, except in qualifying. So in general, Lewis was faster by my observation, but in qualifying he lost to George. Why do you think that happened? Well, I think George, as I say, I think, that whole section there, Lewis was superb. But when you're on a new set of soft Pirellis and the car's just about as good as you can get it, I think George is very, very good, and he's not going to make mistakes. He's going to get the best from that lap, and he did. But when he's on mediums that have done 5 laps, or he's on a full or a heavy fuel load run, then the Lewis way of just letting the car float a bit more and just being a bit more gentle with everything will always, and more stability in shorter corners, will be better. And I think it's just that one. It's the same with any long corner driver, any driver who's a bit spiky but very, very good in terms of car control and balance and feel. Then give them a new set of soft tyres, pretty good balance. They're always going to be mega quick for one lap, no doubt. Ronnie Peterson, but that isn't just the weekend, isn't it? It's not just one lap. So that's what happened there. I think in general, Lewis had this looser feel to the car of what he was doing, and everything was very square and very nice in the way he was running the car. Beautiful to watch. R.A.U.O. Raul, probably Brazilian. Yeah. Do you think Frank Williams' humble beginnings made him stand out in the Formula One paddock, and why was he so driven? That's a good question. Humble beginnings. He went to a very, very strict Jesuit boarding school, like Carlos Reutemann. They had that in common, interestingly enough. And I think that made Frank a bit of an introvert and very, very disciplined, very self-disciplined. And we saw that throughout his life with first of all, with his running and his commitment to racing, I say foot running, marathons. And then post-accident with his mental strength and auto-suggestion of not allowing himself to wallow in self-pity. And all of that comes under the heading of self-discipline and being incredibly strict with your regime. So that's that's the Frank I knew. Why was he so committed to racing? Because he didn't believe in doing it less than 100%. Holidays were an intrusion that he objected to. Having to go to cocktail parties with fellow team principals over the Christmas break was something he did not enjoy. And if he had to go, he would make sure he got there late so he could be the last to park, so that if he wanted to leave early, he could get in his car and go, and he wouldn't have to wait for somebody else to move their car. Everything was like that with Frank. And if he was driving to Heathrow from Didcot, he would set the stopwatch to see if he could beat the previous best time. He was just like that. That was his makeup, and I don't think it was any different. Just total commitment, and that endeared him to a lot of racing people, because they just saw this guy that was out there 100% committed to racing. You think about the Temporada series, Formula 2. He's doing that with Piers Courage. He's doing like 5 races in Argentina mainly Argentina, Colombia, and a couple of other countries. Racing every weekend. And in the middle of that, in the days of Boeing 707s, Frank gets on a plane on a Monday with a gearbox as his cabin baggage, flies back to England, goes to Hewland, gets the rebuild, flies back on the Thursday for the gearbox to be at the track on the Friday. And that was just normal life for Frank. And I think I don't think he enjoyed the Sunday afternoons when he wasn't racing and he had to sit there having a Sunday lunch somewhere. It just wasn't his thing. He would go back to the office and make phone calls and get on with racing. He's just a pure racer. There's no better word to describe Frank Williams than racer. So it wasn't humble humble beginnings. It was just this incredibly strict regime in which he lived his life, running, diet, everything. And as for the passion, it all started at the British Grand Prix 58 when he hitchhiked to Silverstone as a kid and ducked under the fence and saw Peter Collins win the British Grand Prix. Blonde-haired Englishman in a Ferrari. And Frank was already very patriotic with his upbringing and, with his upbringing, I guess. Family, probably. Very patriotic. And the sight of Peter Collins winning that race, that British Grand Prix in a Ferrari, was just ignited this flame inside Frank Williams. So there you go. Sheriff of Sound of Vote, yeah, hi there. Hi Peter. Jean-Michel Tibi, in an interview, told an interesting anecdote about a meeting you had with Lewis Hamilton in Turkey in 2006, when Anthony's father was watching the area to make sure no one from... It froze, now I've had to free up the chat. I hope I come back to the right point. Always nervous about these things because it's not very clear how it's supposed to work. It hasn't come back. I want to know, was watching, how ridiculous. So I don't know what he was about to, was watching. Anyway, hopefully that'll come back. But yeah, I remember, Jean-Michel, great friend. I remember that chat with Lewis. Yeah. Lucas, hi Peter. Where would you rank Lewis in the greatest drivers in the sport's history? His legacy speaks for himself and his longevity. But I'd be interested to hear your take on it. Well, yeah, I would put him as one of the greatest racing drivers of all time. No doubt about that. I couldn't put my hand on my heart and say he was better than Nuvolari, or better than Caracciola, or better than Ascari, or better than Fangio, or better than Jim Clark or Sterling Moss, because there's no way of comparing them. Different eras, different cars, different systems. But I would put him up there with the greatest drivers of all time. There's no other way to describe it. He is one of the greatest racing drivers in the history of our sport. That's all you can do, and you can't compare. And that's why I don't really go in for stats at all these days in terms of number of wins, number of points, number of podium finishes, all that stuff, because the point scoring system is different, the number of races they do is different, the number of opportunities to do well is different, the cars are much safer, the circuits are safer, so what's the point in making comparisons? You just can't do it. So there you go. Astral Police says, he's talking to A. Gixa Squid. Don't forget Mexican driver Pato Award in IndyCar. Yeah, he's pretty good, isn't he? Oh, well, there you go. So lots of chat amongst yourselves. That's good. That's usually a moment when I think, yeah, probably time to let you guys chat amongst yourself. I'm going to try Michael Lawless. Rolex is withdrawing as a partner. Yeah, looks like there's a big new deal with LVMH, and they've got Moet and Chandon. I think they'll be coming back, and also Hublot, I think, watches Tag Heuer. So it's a bit of a shame. I mean, that whole Rolex thing with Formula One as the sponsor of the series, the chronometer, it's in concert with everything else they do incredibly well in golf and tennis, Wimbledon, all those things. It fits in perfectly. So great shame, I think. Rolex have this wonderful feel to them as a company, don't they? Just sheer solid brilliance and nice things. So yeah. I'm just going. Now all the super chats have come down. I've got another one here. Let me have a look. This is a super chat from. Now I've got to get here because that disappeared from there as well. I've got to do something about this. Oktay Yilmaz. Hi, you spoke about Abu Dhabi 21 after Lewis win. We didn't win. Don't you really think it made it way too dramatic? Where Max did not pay his penalty. I think Lewis played victim with faster car all season. Quite sure I understand that question. I'm very sorry. I know it's a super chat. But just to clarify my thoughts on that, I think Lewis did an unbelievable job in that last race to win the race. One of the best opening laps I've ever seen driven. And the race director made a massive error relative to the sporting regulations, which has now been clear. We all know that. By not ensuring that all the cars unlap themselves, which is the rule, and instead of which allowed the race to be restarted when it shouldn't have been. It should have been finished under a safety car with 1 lap to go. And it would have been a wonderful moment for Lewis to have clinched his 8th World Championship, driving around behind the safety car, fireworks going off, the music, everything, and he deserved it. But because of that error, it was a sprint race with Max on a new set of soft tyres, Lewis on his old race tyres, and it was all over, and Max won the championship. No fault of Max. I mean, Red Bull were in there pushing for that decision, and they obviously got the race director, Michael Massey, to make that decision. But it was an error. It was a mistake. And I don't think Mercedes pushed it hard enough in the courts. I think that could have got reversed. And I think it should have been reversed. I still do. And I think it's a massive miscarriage of justice, about equal to Bernie Ecclestone taking the points away from the 81 South African Grand Prix and Nelson Piquet, his driver, then winning the championship by 1 point, which wouldn't have happened if he hadn't stripped Kyle Lamy of its points. So I put those two up there together, and I've always felt that. And since then, Lewis has had to live with that, and I can't imagine how difficult that was to live with, to have a championship in your grasp, and then it's just taken away by somebody making a wrong decision, which is then considered to be too late to go back on. And he's driven pretty well ever since. He's shown that he's prepared to mix it with people. Obviously, it hasn't been easy. George Russell's in the car, very, very quick, but he's kept his motivation, he's kept his determination, he's kept his love of driving, and he's always been civil and polite to other drivers, I think. And I think he conducted himself incredibly well after Abu Dhabi as well, after that 21-ish episode. And here we are today, 2.5 years on. He's finally had a car on race day that feels pretty good, and with all the conditions that all the drivers faced at Silverstone, which were weather, tyres, the rain, traffic, all the things that were there, he won the day, and he drove beautifully to do it. So it was a momentous occasion, I think, for Lewis Hamilton that day. I don't know if, I hope that kind of gets to where your question was. Astral Police, indeed, Tag Heuer and a couple of other watches. Hublot, I think, or Tag, and the running for the new sponsor. Sorry. Google Sarai says, I can't afford to ask questions here. Super chats are so expensive. I think most of the currencies are in, I don't know what. So don't worry about it, mate. 1 penny is enough. Tristan Cortez. I shouldn't say that, should I? I'm supposed to be commercially minded. Hi, Peter. Love your videos. That's very kind, Tristan. Thank you. I know you're quite well acquainted with Linus Lundqvist in IndyCar. Yeah. I was wondering who in IndyCar you think would be successful in Formula One. Thanks for keeping up the good work. Well, most of them, I think. I was very annoyed that Colton Herta didn't get his super license. I think he's got a massive amount of talent. I think, all of the young guys out there, there's so many good ones now, but Linus obviously is a driver that I think has the talent for Formula One, and Formula One showed no interest in him whatsoever. He couldn't get the budget together even to do proper F3, let alone F2. So he went to IndyCar, went to Indy Lights, went to something below Indy Lights, won Indy Lights, and then got the money to get a test and get a drive, and now he's a Ganassi driver. It's a dream story, and Formula One in some ways should be ashamed of it because they should have that system there. There are obviously very good drivers. Marcus Ericsson's done very well, and he did a lot of days with Rob Wilson as well, so I knew Marcus very well when he was on the way up into Formula One, and he had his day obviously at Sauber, and he's done extremely well. And funnily enough, when I was trying to put together my last Formula One operation, USF1, and there's a long story about why that never happened, which is an entire video section on its own, which I'll do one day. But putting that to one side, I was very keen to run American drivers, young drivers, either in a reserve driver role or perhaps as a number 2 driver role. And one of the drivers that I invited to come and do some days with Rob Wilson was Joseph Newgarden, with Connor Daly as well. And because they've both been contemporaries and I was always impressed by both of them. And I think Connor's really good too, to be honest, very good. I met Joseph then, and he did some days with Rob, and he Rob thought he was fabulous, and he's such a nice guy, and he would have definitely been on the list of people that we would have had. So, I'm a big fan of Joseph. And I think had Formula One taken him under their wing, if that's the right phrase, he got a proper test drive and done a full season of testing and got out there, for sure Joseph Newgarden would be right up there. Will Power quite clearly has the talent as well. I remember bumping into him at Mark Webber's place once. G'day, Will. Yeah, going over to America. Yeah, good on you. And he's obviously massively talented. So, McLaughlin, so many. I think they're really talented guys. And IndyCar's, it's nice in a way because it's still fairly basic. They don't go over the top with all the paddock club staff and the pit lane and everything. They go to these tracks and races and they put it on and they go there and they go for it. And it's real raw racing in some ways, I think, still. Yeah, and Felix Rosenqvist, another guy I got a lot of time for. I'll never forget how good he was at Poe in Formula 3. If anybody can be that good at Poe, and Zandvoort for that matter, bit less of a thing, but Poe particularly, they've got to be good. And that's where I first really embraced the talent of Lando Norris, but seeing the TV coverage of what he was doing at Poe in Formula 3. And Felix was just as good, in my opinion. Is just as good. Sorry, I just had to release the next batch of chats. Just want to make sure also I'm not missing more super chats. Sujith, with regards to watching and learning from a great driver's footwork on the pedals, we get to see that on the Nürburgring Nordschleife record laps and onboards. We need that in Formula One. Well, we do, but the problem is the lack of space and lighting. It's for the lighting, man. You get tiny cameras these days, but it's the lighting. And a couple of times many times I've said, we've got to have footwell cameras, and we've got the new regulations coming up. Let's build that in. And then the new regulations come up, and I used to ring up Charlie Whiting and say, Charlie, what's going on? Oh, yeah, not happening. So that was it. So there you go. Another super chat here, is that right? Okay, Brandon Hollis, it is indeed. Thank you very much, Brandon. Hi, Peter. Were you ever in a team where there was a gap in results between the two drivers like Max and Checo? How did that impact the team dynamics in the garage amongst mechanics and engineers? Let me think about that. In terms of working with a team, no. I was always in teams with two front-running drivers at each other's throats the whole time. I'm trying to think. Everything with Nigel, he always had somebody quick in the other car. And Ricciardo was obviously not as quick as Nigel, but in 91 he was really good. In 92 with the active car, it wasn't great, but the mechanics still 100% into him. But they were eras when, I didn't when I was team manager at Williams. When I was managing drivers, I'd always encourage them to pay their mechanics a few extra quid if they got a point, or the top three would be more than a few extra quid without the rest of the other mechanics knowing. And we always used to do that stuff. I think everybody did it. I don't think there's anything new there, but I don't think that would be allowed today, would it? So how does it impact the team? Well, if you're at Aston Martin, for example, and you've got Stroll, well, Stroll's actually going quite well now, isn't it? So probably a bad example. But let's say it's a day when Stroll's not going well and Fernando's in the top three or whatever, doing one of his podium things, and Stroll's ninth. I would imagine when they all go down to the pub, don't the Fernando mechanics say, yeah, but if it wasn't for your guy, we wouldn't have a team anyway, because it's his old man that's paying for it all. So, you guys are just as important. Here, have another pint. Isn't that how it would work? Checo's guys, same thing. He's bringing a lot of money to the team, and they can always say, probably with some justification, oh yeah, but if Checo hadn't done that race simulation on the thing the other day with a different front flap, there's no way Max would have run that in the race, and that's how he won the race. So Checo should take a lot of credit for that. They probably, do they know that sort of thing? They probably do. I think they probably all think that way. I imagine they would. I would encourage that if I was a team manager, because then you'd keep a bit of balance, don't you? So Ben Cashman says, hi Peter, what do you think will replace piston engines, and do you think one day we'll revisit gas turbines? Bring back the Lotus 56. I see the helmet's going to be at Goodwood. That'll be good, wouldn't it? The helmet gas turbine. Was it gas? Yeah. what will replace piston engines? Well, 2026, aren't we going to 50% electrification? I suppose the only question mark now is whether it's going to be hydrogen or not, I suppose. I don't know. I'm not very good on stuff like that because I'm not interested in it. I just like engines that make a noise and do what they do. But I shouldn't be saying that because, yeah, I try to save the planet as much as I can. But I do think there are moments when we as human beings just want to get out and do what we do, don't we? That's why I'm buying a Hyundai i20N, because I just love the noise and I love the H-pattern gearbox and the drilled pedals and good, you know, keep it up. I don't know. Please may I get my question answered? This is from Stalin Senpai. Yeah, well, there you go. It's up. What's the question? Can't see it anymore. That's all I've got. I'm still annoyed about that Jean-Michel Tibby thing because Jean-Michel's brilliant and for sure it was an amazing comment. But this thing, because I moved it, it deleted all the other questions. It's so annoying this. I've been talking to my guys to say I'm going to have a different chat system because this doesn't work very well. And they've said, yeah, in time. So Scott Free Love. Pedro Rodriguez in the 917 was magic. I remember watching him at the Nürburgring and Spa. I was just a boy, but I'll never forget it. Yeah, well, lucky you. Spa, door handle to door handle with Joe Siffert, John Wire, hair turning grey prematurely, and Nürburgring, wow. Yeah, he was fabulous. And Pedro was one of those drivers. He just got better and better, actually. It's such a shame he did that race, that Norris ring race. What a waste. And he was, I mean, when I saw him in 68, as I say, in the wet at Longford, he was fabulous. And in 68 Warwick Farm, I remember I was flag marshalling going into a left-hander after the hairpin, and every lap he'd come in and be in that lovely little V8 BRM. Very cool. What a driver. I loved his helmet and everything as well, that lovely silver helmet, and the way he sat in the car and the mask. Everything was always perfect with Pedro. And I remember in Motoring News one year, 70 French Grand Prix, in the BRM P160, there's a shot of him. It's going through a right-hander. It's probably the last corner, actually. And he's like that much opposite lock-on. And he's just sitting in the car. And that caption was, "Hold it, Pedro!" exclamation mark. Probably Andrew Marriott's caption. I cut that out immediately, stuck it on my wall. Pedro Rodriguez. Mario Andretti told me once that one of the first, I think the first year he did the Daytona 24 hours, I'm not sure he shared the car with Pedro. He might have. It's probably a Canetti car, Ferrari. Anyways, after the race, they took the car to Daytona Beach, and started doing these, lovely figure eights on the beach and having a laugh, he and Pedro together. And then the tide came in. They had to be rescued. Pedro was a bit worried for a while. Mario thought it was a big laugh. So here we go. I believe another issue with Perez performance is Red Bull strategy. This is a typical thing where it's gone again. Strategy options during race, not just about the constructors. Malcolm Jones. I believe another issue with the Perez performance is it reduces Red Bull strategy options during the race. It isn't just about the constructors. Does it? Does it reduce? I'm going to move a little bit. No, I'll move the camera a little bit. There you go. So I'm a bit more in the center. That's how it should be. No. Does it reduce the strategy options in the race? Well, yeah, it obviously does if he's nowhere. That's true. But then again, it's very tense if you've got two drivers fighting one another. That doesn't necessarily increase the strategy options either, does it? Makes everybody a bit stressed and mistakes creep in. That's the whole Michael philosophy of having somebody like Pedro, that everything's focused on Michael's job in the car, and somebody like did I say Pedro then? I certainly didn't mean Pedro. I meant Checo. And it allows the team to focus on one driver and not and minimize the errors as well. So I think that's a positive, actually, rather than, the strategy options have gone away because you haven't got a guy right at the front. Anyway, as I keep saying, let's just see what he does in Hungary, because I'm pretty sure he'll be okay there. As I say, I'll be shattered if he's not. Completely shattered. So Dejan Z said they should bring back V10s and run them on ethanol. That would be smelling nice too, wouldn't it? Right. Chris Ward. Yeah, Chris, thank you. Get rid of the overtake rule altogether. Everyone has the same arrow. Back to the art of the overtake. So there you go. Let's have a look at some more. Learning German language and culture is the name of this person. That's a great name. I think I ought to subscribe to that. Reminds me of Max and Ricciardo. Red Bull needed every single point, and those two kept destroying races. Did they? Oh well. Obscura Pit. Newey. Come on, Newey. Yep. Well, wouldn't it be funny, as I said before, I think I've said once before, if he ended up jet skiing in Cape Town and didn't do anything at all? Herman Bulls. Does Lance get the credit he should deserve? His very rich father is always talked about. You can't blame him for that, or for not being popular. Well, I think I give him a reasonable amount of credit. The problem is, I'd like to give him more credit than he gets, because I think he's got the brains to do a lot of work with Rob Wilson. But they don't like that being talked about, because the father wants everyone to think that it's all natural. He doesn't need anyone to tell him how to drive. So that's the problem. And he's starting to go quite well again, isn't he? He's had a very bad patch, but he's starting to go quite well. And as I said, point last year, I think I think he's finding, or has found, Fernando's setup quite difficult, and he likes to be a bit softer in terms of setup and less understeer, and I think that's because Fernando just likes to get the car in. Well, he's got understeer with Fernando's setup. Fernando doesn't have understeer with it, but when he drives with Fernando's setup, he gets understeer. That's the problem, and he's got to find a way of not having that understeer. And they've obviously found that now, but whether or not the car's that good or not is another matter, of course. So, Jacob Fletcher. Hi, Peter. Hope all's well. Do you think Ferrari have a genuine chance of winning the Constructors or Drivers Championship next year? Love your content and followed you for a long time. Thanks very much, Jake. I do, yes, I do. I'd be shocked if Ferrari by next year haven't got it right, because their chief chassis designer's now just gone to Mercedes, I think, isn't he? So they're probably set for somebody. I see Freddie Vasseur's taking over the chassis engineering role for the moment. Probably do very well with that. Back to the old Formula 3 days. Good stuff. Dudemeister. Question. Hi, Peter. Do you reckon great modern Formula 1 drivers would do well in the past too, and vice versa? Or are these generations different beasts altogether? Well, it's a question of whether Tazio Nuvolari would be able to master active diffs, brake balance controls, and all the mixture settings and stuff they have on the car. And conversely, whether Max Verstappen would be good at heel and toeing and changing gear with a gear lever between his legs. So that's I'm being stupid, aren't I? But it's kind of the reality, isn't it? There's so much difference between those eras. Obviously, those drivers were what they were in those eras. But if you took a driver of Nuvolari's talent, and he was 12-year-old now, but he had exactly the same DNA as Nuvolari, and put him in a kart and then took him up, for sure he'd be a world champion, for sure. And equally, Max, if you put Max in an Auto Union team, and had he grown up in that era, he would be just as good as Hermann Lang. It's quite funny to think about, isn't it? Even funnier to think about if Tazio Nuvolari was on Twitter, and what he would tweet to Achille Varzi, and vice versa. Hey, what you do now tonight? Where we go? Yeah, I'm busy. I'm in my room. M. Arshad Zahangir Chowdhury. Hello there. Mr. Windsor, what are the similarities in Max's mentality and driving style with that of Michael Schumacher's? How would you rate Michael's rain driving with Michael's? I can make sure my cap's straight, is it? It's even more crooked now. That way. There we go. Yeah, they both are very good at knowing what they need from a car in order to drive that car at its maximum, given the shortcomings that any car has. So if you list the shortcomings of any car, poor traction, not very good turn-in, it's not very quick in a straight line, whatever it might be, and you put them in, you said to Max and you said to Michael, which ones of these do you want to eliminate? Which ones can we live with in order to do the lap that we got to do tomorrow in qualifying? Both of them are extremely good at knowing what they can impart to a car, make up for, providing the engineers get that little problem solved. So yeah, we got to have a little bit less rear flap because we've got to have a more top speed. I know that's going to give us more oversteer going into that medium speed corner, but if I do this, I know I can do that, and blah, blah, blah. And that's when they're absolutely spot on, because they're absolutely at the limit of what a human being can do in that car. And they know what can be done and what can't be done. And that's what makes them different. And in that sense, Michael is no different from Max, who's no different from Lewis, who's no different from Nigel Mansell, who's no different from Jim Clark or Sterling Moss. I think Michael was more interested in the overall, in people and the overall picture, and he was quite capable of putting a race team together, as we saw with Jean Todt and Ross Brawn, and a lot of those people Michael wanted and chose and ran, and Michael was very good at when the situation arose with McLaren on Bridgestone and winning races in 98 and 99, winning the championship indeed. Michael was very good at turning that around and getting Bridgestone effectively to supply Ferrari exclusively, and getting McLaren onto Michelin along with all the other teams, and giving him sort of 5 years exclusive with Bridgestone. That was a Michael classic, and that's typical of what Michael's ability was. I don't think Max has that sort of global picture, political, business-like picture. He's much more of just a raw racing driver who wants a very quick racing car. He's very good at getting the best from that racing car. But if you said to Max, okay, you can go to Ferrari, it's a clean sheet of paper, you can bring with whoever you like from Red Bull or any other team that you want, put the team together, it's your team. I'm sure he'd say Adrien Newey, but I'm not sure he would know how to put all that together and make it work in a completely new environment in the way Michael did, taking people from Benetton to Ferrari. So I think they're the differences. The similarities, as I say, is the way they did that. And in terms of the actual driving of the car, pretty similar. And I don't think Max is any less of a wet weather driver than Michael was. As good as Michael was in the wet, I think Max is just as good in the wet. Because you can't be as good as either of them were in the way they use short corners and the way they balance a car and the stability of the platform they could generate. You can't do those things unless you've got unbelievable touch and feel and rhythm. And if you got that, you're quick in the wet. You know, you can feel the grip and you know what you're doing. So there's no magic to the wet other than it's feeling the grip and knowing exactly where to go. Oh no, that hasn't got grip there. We'll try it. Oh yeah, that's good. Now how much load, how quickly can we go on that bit where there is the grip? That's the art. It's one thing to know where the grip is. It's another then to maximize that grip and not go over the top either. So good question. Thank you very much. So I'm just sort of doing my quick scan to make sure I haven't missed any super chats, because it must be very annoying when people do a super chat and Windsor doesn't manage to get around to answering it. I'm sure there's somebody going to be saying that. But I'm still annoyed about that thing with Tibby, that question. I mean, if anything is a good example of how we need to redo the way we do the chat here. I mean, I'm interested to know whether people think this is a cool thing to have your question up there, or whether it might be better to have all the chat visible on the right-hand side, as some live streamers do. I don't know what the answer to that. I think this looks quite neat and tidy, but equally it's very annoying when I can't get to all the questions, or they disappear when I'm reading them halfway through. So there we go. Becky, any updates on Newey? Where do you think he will end up? No, I haven't got any updates. I'm sure some people have. Would he go to Aston Martin? I suppose that's one thing we need to think about with Andy Cowell there now, who's very good. He's the ex-Mercedes powertrain guy, and he's now heading up Aston Martin, I think he's replacing Martin Whitmarsh. And so that he's a very well-respected, talented guy, good guy, and Adrien for sure, I would imagine, likes him a lot. And I would think that's one of the things they'll be saying to Adrien, you know, Andy Cowell now, this is going to be a really good team. I would imagine Lawrence Stroll, number one priority in life is to try to get Adrien Newey to work for Aston Martin, because if he's done that, he's, you know, done deal. And then he can sell Aston Martin for whatever price he wants if Adrien Newey's in there, if he needs to sell it, if Lance stops racing. So that's where he'll be flat out trying to do that deal. But would Adrien want to go to Aston Martin? Possibly. He probably sees it as a real challenge. You know, if you can win with Max, it's one thing. If you can win with an older version of Fernando Alonso, still a very quick one, but not the young Fernando that won championships when he was at Renault. If you can win another championship with Fernando, that's pretty good. And if you can take Lance Stroll into the winner's circle, that's pretty good too. On the other hand, he may think, Lance Stroll, not sure. Fernando, you know, in his 40s, you know, I don't know. I can't imagine what Adrien would think there, but I suspect he's still. I would have thought the Ferrari option would be more interesting for him, to him. Equally, he may think it's all just too political and chaotic, and at this age of his life, does he really need all that? So I don't have an answer. I'm just rambling on, really, musing about what he might do. I think any self-respecting team principal should have or should be still trying to get Adrien Newey, and any team that doesn't hire him needs to look very deeply and inwardly as to what they've done wrong not to get him. And I said, you know, the big shock really is if he doesn't go to Mercedes, because then you got to say that there's something about the job that Toto Wolff has done that needs to be questioned, because with that budget, with that in the past, and with that as those facilities and that history and that reputation, should be a shoo-in for Mercedes to get Adrien Newey if he's on the market, and yet doesn't look as if he's going to go there. And that's quite a big loss for them. It's a big loss not to have Adrien Newey, because it's not to say they won't do well with the team they've got. It's just that if Mercedes have Adrien Newey, you know, how many more championships are they going to win over the next 10 years? A lot more. So there we go. Right. I'm going to go back to the top again. So annoying this. Hello, Peter. Good evening. Joanna. Hello there. Joe B1 Kenobi. Hey, Peter, do you think the RB19 would be competitive in the 24 season, or the RB20 is a step up? I think it is a step up. It's quite easy to say, well, it's getting beaten by a McLaren or this or that. But the loads are higher, the cars are faster. I'm not sure the 19 would be getting the best from these tyres now. And I probably didn't have as much room for the development areas in which they wanted to go anyway. I mean, they've done some things to the car, underneath the car and all around it, that they couldn't have done with the architecture of the 19. So I think it is a step up. It's just because McLaren are going as well as they are, and now Mercedes, everybody thinks the RB20 is not a great car, but I think it's still a very good car. Let's just, you know, it's been 3 or 4 races recently where it's looked a bit tardy. Let's see what happens now as the season progresses before we really start to make a judgment on that. Steve T. Hi, Peter. Do you think it's time Oscar looked for a new team? It seems McLaren ruin his race time and time again. It seems they want one in the team. Well, I don't think it's deliberate, and I think they would love to see Oscar win a Grand Prix. And I think McLaren have made it pretty clear that if they both end up with 10 laps to go on the same strategy, the same tyres are exactly the same life, then they're free to race. And I think that's pretty clear. Unless, of course, the championship is starting to loom for Lando. And I think that's a good thing. McLaren have done a very good job there in allowing them to race. And I think Oscar will win some races soon. I've no doubt about that. Would he be better in another team? I mean, it's interesting to think what would have happened had he just done what he was announced to be doing. In other words, driven for Alpine, as he was announced as the race driver for Alpine alongside Esteban Ocon. had he done that, he would have been showing up Ocon, I think, and he would be on everybody's list. And maybe he would have gone to Ferrari instead of Lewis, maybe. Or maybe he would be going to Mercedes now, alongside George, if he was at Alpine. But because he's got a long-term commitment to McLaren, and obviously, he owes McLaren a lot for the team he's with and the car he's got and doing what they did, that isn't going to happen. But it's interesting to think that he might have been in a better position by now had he gone to Alpine, stayed at Alpine. Carl Gevers, Peter, has Newey ever designed a bad or mediocre car in his early career? Don't think he has, no. I think everything he's done has been very good. I mean, he's certainly, obviously at Leighton House, they ran out of money and they weren't able to develop the car as much as Adrien would have wanted, or maybe even do the car as he wanted in every detail. But earlier in his career before that, I don't think so, no. He was always doing good stuff, and his aerodynamics were always very sound, very good. Very good. It was interesting talking to Helmut Marko the other day, and we were talking about, apropos engineers, I was talking to him about how competitive he was and how quick he was in 2-litre sports cars, which was a category we don't have today, but lovely little cars, Chevrons, Lolas, and there were 2 litres, obviously, FVC engines, Cosworth engines, very, very close racing, really competitive. Jody Scheckter was there, Helmut Marko, and Brian Redman. It was really, really close racing, spectacular racing. And I was saying to Helmut, how good that was. And his immediate response was, which shook me a bit because I'd kind of forgotten it. He said, "Oh yeah, but it was so nice to drive a Patrick Head car." I thought, wow, is he a bit confused? Is he thinking I'm talking about Williams or something? And then I suddenly thought, oh no, of course, Patrick was at Lola and designed that lovely T212 2-litre sports car. And he said, yeah, the Patrick Head engineering was the greatest thing I ever drove. And he went on about Patrick Head as if he was a Williams driver. It was brilliant. And so it just shows, doesn't it? Those engineers in their early days, those Helmets saying how good Patrick Head was, Patrick Engineering. Where are we? 9:30. Yeah, going to have to call it a day, champions, people. Thank you. Michael Romero, the people champ. I think you're talking about Lewis there, aren't you? You're not talking about me, that's for sure. Let's have a look. Lewis is the people's champ. Yeah, there you go. So Michael Romero says, that was the worst championship ending in any sport I've ever seen. I think you're talking about Abu Dhabi 21. I have to agree with you there. That was bigger than just Formula One, wasn't it? Or worse than just Formula One. So there you go, all that. A lot of people still talking about that. Adrien Pollard. Hi, Peter. Love these videos. My point is, what is the actual point of DRS? Maybe I'm naive, but it seems designed to penalise the driver that has qualified on pole leading the race. Absolutely. Another ludicrous thing. Well, the whole point of DRS is to pacify this ridiculous question they asked years ago now in a fan survey, the famous fan survey, Formula One fan survey. Do you want to see more overtaking? And what yes or no, what box do you think everybody ticked? So then Formula One said, we got to have more overtaking. They're still doing it. Got to have more overtaking. As I said, it's taken away the art of defence. It's made most of the overtaking completely meaningless. And as you say, you win the pole, you're leading the race, and suddenly DRS comes into play, and bong, it's all over. The whole thing's ridiculous. And I think it's dangerous. I don't like speed differential. I keep going on about that, and that's why I've never been a fan of the Le Mans 24-hour race for a start. The circuit today is a bit different, obviously, but even so, the high speeds are still there. And the speed differential between fast and slow is one of the most dangerous things you can have in motorsport. And DRS does nothing but encourage that, as we saw as recently in Austria with that ludicrous shunt, after you Claude type shunt, where neither of them knew really where to place the car purely because of DRS. There was no, if there'd been no DRS, Max wouldn't have been where he was and Lando wouldn't have been where he was. E says, don't you think your comment on Abu Dhabi was a bit unbalanced and biased, contrary to the previous comment where you were praised for your balanced answers? Well, if you can show me where I was unbalanced and biased, I'll be happy to agree with you. But I don't think I was. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. What was unbalanced and what was unbiased? What was biased? I mean, I only fact. You know, I actually reported the facts as distinct from putting an angle on them. So there we go. Jeeves Soris. Hi Peter, I was wondering if you can see Carlos Sainz getting the seat at Mercedes now that they seem to have cooled on Antonelli. Have they? But didn't he win the sprint race at Silverstone or something? I think he did. Yeah, I can see if they've cooled on Antonelli. But to what extent have they cooled on Antonelli? Have they said they don't want him at all now, or they just don't want him next year? Because if it's only next year, would Carlos just go to Mercedes for 1 year? On a 1 year deal to be replaced by Antonelli? It's not very good, is it? But if they said to Carlos, 5-year contract, mega, we think you're wonderful, go for it, here's the road car, carry on, I think he'd do it. But have they called on Antonelli to that extent? It's a big turnaround for Toto Wolff, isn't it? It's a big turnaround from saying when Antonelli was in Formula 4, this guy's much too busy to do interviews or even talk to the media, he's the next megastar, the next Ayrton Senna, to saying we don't want him anymore. Based on what? Anyway, Kevin Pryor, do you know if Penske and McLaren were related in the 90s? Today's McLarens in both Indy and Formula 1 made me think about the Marlboro liveries. Penske and McLaren. For sure they were. More on the engine side, I think. Let me think about that. Penske. Well, Mark Donohue finished third in his Formula in the US Grand Prix in a McLaren. There you go, in his first Grand Prix. 71, I think. So that's the link, Penske and McLaren. What it means today, I don't know. Penske runs IndyCar and his own team extremely well, and McLaren are in there doing a reasonable job. But I know what you're getting at. I'm just trying to think. It's quite easy to think that they probably work together a lot, but I'm not sure they have, actually. I'm just trying to think. Penske, McLaren? Maybe not. But the Penske's run McLarens, as I say. So, yeah, blue McLaren. M19. Mark Donohue. Jay says, it's 7 championship. Quit crying over it already. The Singapore 08 will not be overturned, nor will Abu Dhabi 21. Yeah, but what about Kyalami 81? That needs to be... We need to start in chronological order. Actually, I think we need to look back at the 58 World Championship. I still think Sterling Moss should be given equal title to that with Mike Hawthorn for giving Mike Hawthorn the point that enabled him to win the championship. He did that in the previous race in Portugal. Wasn't for Sterling, Mike wouldn't have had that extra point. So I think we start from there. Give Sterling equal status on winning that championship, with sharing it with Mike in 58. We'll do that. Then we have to move forward to, well, you know, you could say 64 Mexican Grand Prix, Ferrari, Bandini taking out Graham Hill. Maybe we should give Graham that championship. Although it was good to have John win it, so maybe we'll give Graham equal billing there as well. Then we fast forward to 81, where for sure Carlos Reutemann should be world champion, and then we give Massa the 08 world championship because of Singapore Gate, and everybody starting the race. A lot of people starting the race knowing what was going to happen, so it was an illegal race, if you like. And what was the other one you got there? Abu Dhabi 21. Oh, Abu Dhabi 21. There you go. Lewis. So there you go. All those things. FIA, please sort. Rahul Dareka. Hi Peter, continuing on the IndyCar question, what do you think of Formula One or the FIA should do to make sure more raw talent finds its way to Formula One, irrespective of what background they come from? Well, they should do what I've said many times now. They should have a second championship, a second tier Formula One championship for Formula One cars 2 to 3 years old, but not the current ones, obviously, but they've got to be McLarens or Ferraris or whatever. And it should be the young drivers and it should be on circuits that are new to the Formula One championship, that don't yet have the money to get on the championship but want to be there. like South Africa, like India, like Colombia, like Argentina again, all these wonderful countries, Vietnam. And that's where they should be, a whole new championship, B division championship, and they should have their own TV rights, their own sponsorship for that series, and the team should support it with the cars, and they have to go out and get sponsors just the same way, and TV rights, money, and everything. Structure the whole thing around the Formula One system, but it should be a B division championship, definitely. Speaking of which, this wonderful gentleman, Chris Ellard, has written an amazing book about non-championship Formula One races, which is right up my street. I love obscure things like that, and I love non-championship Formula One races. And he's also written this great book, which I have in my hand, The Likely Lads, which is about the 1 litre Formula 3 days going back to 1964 and going through to about 1971, 72. Just the 1 litre screamers. That's where James Hunt came from. That's where Jackie Stewart came from. Many good drivers, Roger Williams and Dave Walker. And that was just close, competitive racing. And what a work of love this is. I mean, it's just wonderful. Details, interviews with a lot of the existing drivers, details of every race. I just love it. And he's done a book on Formula 2, and he's done a book on non-championship Formula 1 races. So Chris Ellard, congratulations on all your work. I wish I had your dexterity, and he deserves every book sale he gets. Wonderful. Kevin Pryor, would have loved to have seen Dan Weldon and Dario Franchitti in Formula 1. Yeah, so would we all. Dan, Justin Wilson, no longer with us. But you know what? I have no doubt that Tony Stewart and Jeff Gordon would have been really good in Formula 1. And there were moments in the careers of both those drivers when they were happy and they would have been ready to have come over to Europe and got into Formula 1 had they been offered a proper year in Formula 2, paid drive, and testing in Formula 1, and do it the correct way, not just jumping in to see how well they went. Obviously, they need to be nurtured. But both of those guys, enormous talent, and both of them, I knew them both very well at that stage of their careers, and both of them would have been ready to have come to Formula 1, and both of them had the talent. Just Tripathi, but it didn't. I remember that Jeff Gordon was almost ready to do something with Frank Williams, and because Bernie was a bit lukewarm about it, and Frank didn't really know whether he really could do it, it just all petered out. And he drove the Williams in that demo thing he did at Indy, loved it. He would have been good. I mean, Jeff Gordon's a real star. Scott Dixon's another that would have done incredibly well in Formula 1 had he been given the opportunity. Yash Tripathi, hey Peter, your analysis is very profound and helpful from a technical standpoint. As a request, could you please make an analysis video on types of driving styles with driver examples in the future? Yeah, I'll do my best. I've done a few videos about that, haven't I? Why Max brakes early but he's still quick, and short corners, what they're all about, and things like that. I've done quite a lot, but I'll continue to do it. I mean, it's what I love, and it's what I love seeing. And regardless of where Formula 1 goes with its technology, the difference between the drivers will always be there, and that's what I think is the most fascinating thing. I'm not massively into whether or not this rear flap is slightly different from that rear flap. I find all that slightly tedious, but the difference between Yuki Tsunoda and Daniel Ricciardo, yeah, I can look at that all day. So there we go. I'm just going to scan the whole thing for any more super chats, and then we're going to have to call it a day, guys, and do another live stream fairly soon. And Bear Like X, someone who works in technology and data with AI, which team would it be good to apply to work for? At Peter Windsor. It's interesting. I sat next to a guy about 5 years ago on a flight to somewhere, can't remember where. Nice guy. I think he was reading Autosport or something, so I thought, strike up a conversation. And I'm just looking here to see if I've got his name here. I probably haven't. Yeah, I've still got his name here and his number. And we struck up a conversation, and I said, "Oh, wow, have you?" And anyway, it turned out he used to work at Toro Rosso, and he'd left Toro Rosso. I said, "Why?" And he said, "Oh, because my speciality is AI, and that's not going anywhere in Formula 1. So I'm going into industry, and I'm going to be working for some other big company." And that was it. And I remember, and I had a bit of a chat saying, "Are you sure AI is not going to be a thing in Formula One at some point?" And he said, "Well, I keep pushing it, and I keep telling them to do it, but they just don't seem to listen. And I just think they're going to be so negative about it." Isn't that amazing? And now everybody's saying AI, AI. So I would say not Toro Rosso, or as it now is, Visa Cash App. I would not go there, Bear Like X. But any of the other teams, I'd say McLaren would probably be pretty forward thinking. And so would Mercedes, I guess. Yeah, I'd send a letter to Piers Thin, Thyne, at McLaren. Don't mention my name because he'll probably say, "Oh, Windsor, getting all these people to write in, got to open all these letters." But send a letter, write it in ink, a proper letter with a stamp, because then it'll stand out straight away and might make its way there. May not, of course. They probably don't have enough post box at McLaren anymore, but it might. It's always worth trying. So there we go. Anyway, I think that's it. Here we go. I think I've got it. Peter, this is Sheriff of Santa Barbara. Peter, I was saying, what do you think of Lewis' family role in his career from this interview with Jean-Michel Tibby when he was saying that Anthony had to keep the watching to avoid McLaren people around? Was that what it was all about? Stopping the McLaren, had to keep the watching to avoid the McLaren people. Yeah, well, I think, what do I think of the Lewis family role? I think it's wonderful. I think his dad, Anthony, is a great guy. And just what he, his life, and just coming over and being successful as he was in his company. And then obviously seeing in Lewis a lot of talent and helping him make that start in karting, but not overindulging him and keeping Lewis very with his feet on the ground in terms of being a humble person who was lucky to be where he was and to get the best from himself and from everybody and all the opportunity he was given. And I think his family is exemplary, actually. And I think Lewis is too, in the way he handles people and his values. So McLaren, yeah, there was a rough spot, wasn't there, when he wasn't going very well in Formula 3. I think he was driving for ASM with James Rossiter in the other car. It wasn't going that well. It's the Freddie team, and they were on the brink of dropping him, I think, at McLaren. I think, actually, to his credit, I think it was Martin Whitmarsh that saved the day, I think. I think it was a bit of a fight over what he should do next. But anyway, it all worked out, didn't it? And ART with Freddie in Formula 3 and Formula 2, or GP3 and GP2 as it was. And yeah, I mean, at the time when he left McLaren to go to Mercedes, I thought it was a mistake. And I remember saying that at the time and thinking that at the time, that it was never going to be bad for him at McLaren. He might have a few duff years, but it was always going to be a good thing to stay with. And we'll never know. I think it still could have worked out, but obviously going to Mercedes was a good thing, a great thing, and look what it's achieved. So yeah, a lot of people, I'm glad we found that question anyway, Jean-Michel Tibby. Yeah, Anthony was there, definitely. Well, he was a good bloke. Got on well with Ant. Still do, I think, I hope. So, John Everett, this will be the last question, okay? Oh no, Super Chat's just come in. Jitsi Slump. Hope I pronounced that correctly. Hello, Peter. Have you seen the interview in which Max declares he had... Oh, yeah, I've done that. Silverstone 81. Almost stopped US Grand Prix because of it. Yeah, some wag has already said, well, that's why he kept running into Lewis all the time. Yeah, it's kind of weird that he would admit that, isn't it? Because you'd say FIA wouldn't be too impressed by that. So anyway, Valon Krasnikwi, guys, you think Steiner deserves a place in Formula One? Well, yeah, he's got a very impressive carbon fiber shop in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I think he deserves to have his products in Formula One. Very good stuff, high quality. So there we go. Merck doesn't need Newey, says Lubrade. They've got Allison, who's just as good, perhaps even better. Okay, good. Thanks for expressing your opinion. Fazad Jockey. James has been stupendous for Mercedes. The turnaround he's done is admirable. But he hasn't left. He was always there. Don't understand all that. I know he was different job title, but there's no way he was not involved or hasn't been involved all this time. A bit more involved now, but I can't say he hasn't been involved, despite what Mercedes may say. Simon Hosford, this is the last one. Hi Peter, do you know why the brake telemetry is only on or off instead of graduated in the TV coverage? Thank you, sir. No, I don't, and that's a very good reason not to watch it on the TV coverage, but to get hold of proper telemetry, because it doesn't mean anything for it to be on and off. I suppose it's because they just think, oh, they're only interested in when they're braking or not. They're not interested in how they're coming out of the brake pedal pressure or into the brake pedal pressure. Of course, we all are, but I think that's just a question of some producer, some editor thinking, undervaluing the intelligence of most of the people who want to watch and see what's going on. That's my opinion. And yeah, it's a bit like saying, the apex. What apex are they talking about? You see that quite often. And then they do comparison lap speeds, but they never talk about how much fuel they've got and what tires they're on. So I think most of those graphics are quite misleading, actually, and not very useful. Okie dokie. So there we go. Thank you very much. As Michael Schumacher used to say a lot, okie dokie. He used to say okie dokie. I don't know where he got that from. Somebody in Benetton for sure. So thank you very much, everybody, for this. Thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, and to Track Ninja for your support of this channel. It's been a good couple of hours, 2.5 hours, I think, and live streams as ever, a lot of fun. And without those three companies, we wouldn't have the support we need to do this channel the way we do it. So big thanks to them. And thank you to you, the viewer, for watching. We'll do another live stream hopefully before the Hungarian Grand Prix for the next race. But as ever, flat out, we've got Goodwood at the moment. Lots going on with other sport, haven't we? Wimbledon and I don't know, some football or something going on. And then I think I've mentioned this, I'm doing the Rally of Finland at the end of the month, which I'm really looking forward to. And it has been confirmed. I'm doing the shakedown with Terry Newell in the Hyundai. So I'm looking forward to that. With some no trepidation. I just want to make sure that it's a personal thing. I just want to make sure I do the best job I can. And so that'll be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that very much. So thank you very much, everybody, for watching and for your support. And see you again very soon. Stay safe.